Humble cook takes her son to work at an engagement party, and he points to the millionaire and says, "Dad." But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Nancy adjusted the collar of her modest white uniform, heart thudding as she stepped through the grand doors of the Veterans Club's main hall. It was the sort of venue she'd only ever seen in passing. High ceilings molded with intricate patterns, portraits of decorated officers lining the walls, and plush carpets so thick her shoes left prints behind. For a humble cook trying to make ends meet, it felt like walking into another world. Yet here she was, holding tightly to her little boy's hand. Toby, just 7 years old, stared wide-eyed at the chandeliers overhead. His brown curls bobbed each time he craned his neck to absorb every detail. Nancy had never planned on bringing her son to such a prestigious event, but the invitation had come abruptly, and she had no choice but to juggle motherhood with her new catering gig. She hadn't expected to be invited to stay beyond the kitchen, but the Veterans Club manager insisted she remain on call in case the honored guests requested more appetizers or an impromptu dish. An engagement party was underway for none other than Colonel Robert Hudson, a veteran-turned-millionaire philanthropist well known around town. According to local gossip, he'd come from a respected military family and, after his service, built a string of successful businesses. The press often featured him donating large sums to local charities, awarding scholarships, and supporting war veterans. Everyone who was anyone in the community had gathered to toast his upcoming wedding. Nancy fidgeted with the pristine apron around her waist. She'd been preparing canapés in the back for most of the afternoon, carefully following the club's demanding menu. She couldn't let this chance slip by. A cook's recommendation from such an esteemed place might open doors she'd never even dreamed about. Taking a small breath, she whispered to Toby, "Be on your best behavior, sweetie. This is important." Her son nodded solemnly and clutched his ragged teddy bear close, the only remnant of simpler times. The lounge area gleamed with polished oak floors, and silver trays hovered on the arms of the waitstaff. Strains of gentle piano music floated through the air. Veterans in formal attire, some wearing medals on their jackets, conversed with local dignitaries. Women in long evening gowns stood by tall windows overlooking the immaculate gardens. For Nancy, it was a swirl of affluence and power that made her feel smaller than ever. But Toby's presence had a calming effect on her. Despite everything, Nancy's biggest pride was her son. He never complained about the small apartment they lived in or the single pair of decent shoes he owned. At times, Nancy felt guilty for not providing him with the kind of life so many other children took for granted. Tonight, though, Toby stood by her side, eyes shining with curiosity. Suddenly, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and the crowd quieted. A spotlight focused on Colonel Robert Hudson, who stood on a raised platform with his new fiancée, a graceful woman in a satin turquoise dress. A hush fell across the hall. The colonel's voice carried warmth and deep sincerity as he thanked everyone for coming. He spoke proudly of his service, of his love for this country, and of how honored he felt to help veterans. Laughter and applause punctuated his every pause. Nancy hovered near the back with Toby, trying to catch sight of the party's main couple. She recognized Colonel Hudson's face from local papers, his broad shoulders, distinct jawline, and polished aura. Yet seeing him in person was different, more magnetic. Nancy felt a slight flutter of nerves, mixed with the odd sensation that she'd met him somewhere before, though that made no sense. He was a pillar of society, and she was just a cook. "All of us have served. All of us have sacrificed," Colonel Hudson's speech continued. "And tonight, I dedicate my engagement to the spirit of camaraderie. May this celebration honor those who gave so much for our freedom." Another wave of applause roared through the crowd. Waiters refilled champagne glasses while the fiancée beamed at her future husband. Nancy wanted to avert her gaze, feeling oddly self-conscious in that glittering throng. She kneeled down to straighten Toby's jacket. The boy seemed transfixed by the scene, especially the colonel. A peculiar expression crossed his face, though Nancy couldn't decipher it. When the applause subsided, the colonel's gaze swept the room, connecting momentarily with each cluster of guests. Nancy felt her cheeks warm when, for a fleeting second, his eyes locked with hers across the expanse of polished oak flooring. She managed a polite smile, nerves tugging at her, but he'd already moved on, his attention returning to the fiancé and an elderly general stepping up for a handshake. The moment passed as staffers guided the colonel and his bride-to-be toward a table displaying an ornate engagement cake. Nancy exhaled, not sure why the brief eye contact felt so intense. She chalked it up to the glow of the occasion. All the same, Toby tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy," he whispered, "I'm thirsty." Nancy gave his curls a gentle tussle. "Let's find you some juice," she replied. They wove through the edges of the gathering until reaching the refreshment table. A well-groomed waiter offered Toby a tall glass of sparkling cider, and Nancy mouthed a grateful, "Thank you." She felt Toby's small, clammy hand steady itself on her arm as he took a sip. That was when the hush fell. Almost as if the party's energy had shifted, Nancy glanced around, noticing that Colonel Hudson was about to speak again. Another round of toasts, perhaps. The fiancé stood close to him, a bright smile shining under the chandeliers. Toby took one last gulp and set his glass down with an air of sudden determination. Before Nancy could stop him, Toby dashed through the throng, weaving effortlessly between polished shoes and evening gowns. "Toby!" Nancy gasped, heart leaping. She followed in a panic, excusing herself as she bumped shoulders with a uniformed major and nearly toppled a tray of hors d'oeuvres. By the time she'd reached the center of the room, Toby had come to a halt barely 10 feet from the colonel. The crowd stared, uncertain how to react. Nancy's eyes locked onto her son's posture. He was pointing, arm fully extended, at Colonel Hudson. The boy's voice echoed in the sudden stillness. "Dad!" Gasps rippled across the hall. An audible hush fell over the veterans, over the fiancé whose smile vanished, and over Nancy herself, who felt her breath catch in her throat. The colonel stood there, dumbfounded, mouth slightly agape. A wave of shocked murmurs rushed through the guests. The fiancé's face turned from pink to a deep crimson. Nancy's mind reeled. Dad? Toby had never known his father, and Nancy had never spoken of it. She'd never told Toby any lies, but she also hadn't explained the complexities of their circumstances. How on earth? She rushed to Toby's side, dropping to her knees. Her heart pounded as she took his small shoulders, eyes flicking between the colonel's stunned expression and the furious stares of onlookers. She could feel the weight of 100 glances pressing down on her. This was the colonel's engagement party, for heaven's sake, and Toby had just claimed him, of all people, as his father. Could it be a child's mistake? Or was there more to Toby's outburst than Nancy ever suspected? In the silence, Nancy could hear her own pulse hammering in her ears. She glanced at the colonel again. He stared at Toby as though trying to place the child's face, or perhaps he was thinking about the moment Nancy had caught his gaze mere minutes earlier. A wave of incomprehension swept through Nancy. She'd never even met Colonel Hudson in person before tonight, at least not that she recalled. Their lives couldn't be more different. Yet Toby's words, echoing through the hush of that grand hall, threatened to unravel everything. Guests began whispering to each other. The veterans looked from Toby to Nancy, then to the colonel, uncertain how to interpret the boy's cry. All the while, the fiancé's posture tensed, her elegant facade cracking under the weight of Toby's declaration. An announcer cleared his throat, presumably to restore order, but the tension in the air was almost too thick to cut. Nancy placed a trembling hand on Toby's cheek, guiding his chin gently so he'd look at her. "Honey," she managed in the quietest voice, Do you know what you're saying?" Toby's eyes were bright with an earnestness that Nancy had never seen in him before. "Yes, Mommy," he said. "I just know." Somewhere at the back of the room, a flash went off, a photographer capturing the stunned faces of Nancy, Toby, and Colonel Robert Hudson in that pivotal second. Nancy's mouth felt too dry to speak. She searched for the Colonel's eyes, desperate for an explanation, but he seemed as lost as she was, his face pale, his fiancée nearly stumbling backward. Nancy's world seemed to shift on its axis. Could Toby's father be the man now standing at the pinnacle of wealth and admiration? Was there some hidden link between them? She wasn't a woman prone to illusions or fantasies. She'd built her life around cooking, scrimping, saving, and protecting Toby from disappointment. This single moment threatened to pull the rug out from under everything she'd believed. In the hush that followed, the Colonel finally broke his silence. His voice sounded raw, almost uncertain. What did you say, son?" Toby's hand dropped to his side, but his voice remained unwavering. "I said, Dad." An uneasy stillness gripped the hall, broken only by the occasional click of a camera or the rustle of a guest shifting in discomfort. Colonel Robert Hudson's face remained drained of color, his posture rigid as he stared at Toby with a mixture of shock and confusion. No one uttered a word, as though the entire assembly waited for some cosmic verdict to descend. Nancy knelt beside her son, conscious that every eye in the room was fixed on them. She felt Toby's small shoulders trembling beneath her hands, yet his gaze never wavered from the Colonel. It was as if some invisible string stretched between them, a thread neither Nancy nor anyone else in that opulent place could break. Across the hall, Colonel Hudson's fiancée stood frozen, her cheeks flushed in indignation. Moments before, she'd been the picture of composure, graciously accepting congratulations from veterans and dignitaries. Now, all that refined poise vanished. A hush settled so intensely that Nancy could almost hear her own heart pounding in her ears. Suddenly, one of the older veterans, a gray-haired major leaning on his cane, broke the silence with a cleared throat. "Everything all right, Colonel?" he asked quietly, though his voice carried in the stunned quiet. Colonel Hudson stiffened. His eyes flicked to the major, then back to Nancy and Toby. Slowly he cleared his throat as well, trying to summon an authoritative tone. I'm not entirely sure what's going on." The fiancée gripped his arm. "Robert," she said, voice shaking, "tell them you don't know this woman or her child." Her demand echoed throughout the chamber. Several guests began shifting from foot to foot, uncertain whether to remain or politely excuse themselves. Nancy's throat felt tight. Her cheeks burned under the intense scrutiny. Of course, she wanted to tell the entire crowd that it was just a mix-up, just a child's wild imagination. But Toby's voice, clear and resolute, still echoed in her mind. How could he call this powerful, well-known man Dad with such surety? "Excuse us," Nancy finally said. She forced herself to stand, taking Toby's hand. "I'm so sorry for the interruption. He's just confused." But the explanation sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Toby had never said anything like this before. He wouldn't even know how to invent such a claim. A wave of self-doubt welled up inside her. Could she have ever crossed paths with the Colonel in some past so distant she'd forgotten it? She tried to guide Toby away, apologizing under her breath, but a figure blocked their path. An aide to the club's manager, a thin-lipped man in a stiff uniform. "Miss, I'm afraid we need a word," he said, his voice polite but firm. "Please, step over here. The Colonel wishes to clarify the matter." Nancy swallowed hard. She tugged Toby close. Her son didn't resist. He clutched the teddy bear he always carried, his knuckles whitening around it. The crowd parted in a tense hush, forming a half-circle around Colonel Hudson, Nancy, and Toby. The fiancée looked flustered, her gaze darting between Nancy's simple white uniform and Toby's wide, earnest eyes. Colonel Hudson carefully descended the small platform. He moved in controlled strides, as though trying to keep up appearances under the weight of so many stairs. Nearing them, he stopped, and Nancy realized how much taller he was up close. She took a half-step back protectively. "I don't understand," Colonel Hudson said quietly, voice low enough that only the nearest guests could hear. "Have we met before, Ms. Nancy? Nancy Rowe," she replied, her voice quavering. "I'm the cook. I was hired by the club to cater for the engagement party. My son just came with me because I had no one else to watch him." She trailed off, wishing desperately she could vanish. Hudson frowned, and for an instant Nancy thought she saw a flash of recognition in his eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I see," he murmured. "But your son, I don't know why he said that," Nancy cut in hastily, her words coming in a rush. "I've never met you. I wouldn't have—" She paused, swallowing the rest. Telling him she'd never have dared approach someone so far above her station sounded pathetic and might only feed the gossip swirling in the air. Toby, meanwhile, hadn't loosened his grip on her. Yet he looked at the colonel with no fear, no sense of having done something wrong. "Mommy doesn't know," he said quietly, "but I do. I saw him and I knew." The fiancée let out an exasperated laugh. "You realize how outrageous this is?" she said, her voice sharpened by embarrassment. "Robert, darling, you must put a stop to this immediately." Nancy's face reddened further. The stares felt suffocating. Her only solace came from Toby's small but steady hand. This was a dream, or rather, a nightmare. She was here to earn honest pay, not to cause a scandal. "I'm sorry," Nancy repeated, turning to Colonel Hudson with pleading eyes. "He must be mistaken. Please, we'll leave." Before the colonel could answer, a new voice interrupted. "Wait." A stooped older gentleman, draped in a formal uniform decked in medals, stepped forward. The general. His presence commanded immediate respect, and the murmurs settled. "Colonel," he addressed Hudson sternly, "maybe you should speak to the boy. If there's any chance, however small, that what he says holds truth, you have a right to know." A hush fell again. Nancy's heart hammered and Toby's breathing quickened at her side. The colonel's fiancée bristled, looking around at the growing circle of veterans and high society guests who watched, riveted. "This is absurd," she muttered under her breath, but she was drowned out by the curious hush. Colonel Hudson bent down, bringing himself closer to Toby's eye level. It was the last situation he could have wanted on his engagement night, but now that the general had spoken, refusing to address the child would appear callous or cowardly. "Son," he said carefully, "why do you think I'm your father?" Toby gazed at him, those brown eyes bright with an earnestness that belied his young age. "I just know," he repeated, as though no other explanation was necessary. "I dreamed about you before, and when I saw you tonight, it felt like—" He paused, struggling with the words, "like seeing someone I lost." Nancy's lungs seemed to constrict. Toby had sometimes mentioned strange dreams about a man he called the soldier. She'd always assumed it was just a child's imagination. Could Toby have glimpsed Colonel Hudson's photograph in a newspaper once and confused it with a dream? But Toby's tone, so sure, so calm, unsettled her. The colonel let out a long, shaky breath. He glanced around, painfully aware of the spectacle. "Let's continue this in private," he suggested. Relief spread through Nancy's chest. At least the entire city wouldn't witness every word, but judging from the press cameras already flashing at the door, it might be too late to hide the scandal. A nearby side door led to a smaller chamber, usually reserved for veterans' private discussions. Colonel Hudson gestured for Nancy and Toby to follow. The fiancé, seething, tried to join, but the colonel gently held up a hand. "I need a moment. Alone." Though his tone was calm, there was no mistaking it for a request. She hesitated, offended, but the firm line of his jaw warned her against protesting. So, with the parted crowd whispering at their backs, Nancy found herself leading Toby into a quiet antechamber. Colonel Hudson shut the door behind them. Outside, the hush roared with gossip, speculation, and the fiancé's smoldering fury. Inside, the room was plainly furnished, a large mahogany table flanked by chairs, an American flag in one corner, and pictures of servicemen on the walls. Toby perched on a chair, hugging his teddy bear to his chest. Nancy swallowed her fear and looked at the colonel, who stood near the door as if uncertain whether to approach them or keep his distance. She noticed the slight tremble in his hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Colonel Hudson sighed and directed his question to Nancy. "You truly have no recollection of us meeting?" Nancy clasped her hands together. "I wouldn't forget meeting a man of your position," she replied, voice unsteady. "I'm not from this circle. I'm a cook. My life is very different." He leaned against the table, running a hand across his forehead. "I don't know how to explain this," he said finally, turning his gaze back to Toby. "But I can't ignore him. Look at him. Something in his face." Nancy's heart fluttered. Was Colonel Hudson seeing a resemblance? Toby's shy smile, his deep brown eyes, maybe the curve of his jaw? Nancy had always assumed Toby took after her side of the family. Was it possible she was wrong? Toby fiddled with the teddy bear's ear. "I know you don't remember me," he said softly, surprising Nancy with how calm he sounded. "But I remember something." Colonel Hudson sank into a chair across from Toby. "I'm not a man who fathered any child, at least not that I've ever been told," he said, an edge of confusion tightening his voice. "I've been engaged before, I've dated, but—" His words trailed off, and Nancy clasped Toby's hand to still its trembling. The boy's simple presence seemed to chip away at every certainty the colonel had. Nancy found herself torn between wanting to comfort Toby and wanting to demand proof. Some logical explanation must exist. But how to find it? A soft knock on the door made them jump. One of the senior club managers poked his head in. "Colonel," he said, "the guests, they're waiting. Perhaps we can wrap this up. The fiancé is getting restless." Colonel Hudson's jaw tensed. He glanced at Nancy, then Toby. "Give me 10 more minutes," he said. The manager gave a curt nod and withdrew. Nancy squared her shoulders, deciding she had to be brave. If Toby's claim was a bizarre misunderstanding, they needed to address it now. But if, her heart pounded at the thought, it held any truth, the colonel might be the father Toby never knew. She took a deep breath. "Colonel," she asked gently, "is there any chance you've been in my hometown or anywhere near me 8 years ago?" His features clouded, as though he were sifting through memories. 8 years ago I was overseas for a time, then transferred. After that, I spent 6 months in a military hospital stateside." He paused, eyes narrowing. "The hospital. I was injured, had to do some physical therapy. I have flashes, but those were difficult months. Could we have met there?" Nancy's thoughts raced. She'd been a hospital kitchen aide at that time, working double shifts to pay for Toby's birth expenses. Could she have crossed paths with him during that short window? If so, how would that explain Toby's existence? The questions tumbled through her mind in a relentless torrent. Colonel Hudson exhaled, looking from Nancy to Toby. "I don't want to accuse you of lying," he said, "but this is a big claim." Nancy nodded shakily. "I understand. I just want the truth." A silence fell over the small chamber. Toby blinked, tears threatening to form, but never quite spilling over. Slowly, the colonel reached out a hand toward him. Despite Nancy's instincts to hold her son back, Toby extended his little hand. Their palms touched, one large, calloused from years of service, the other small and delicate. In that moment, Nancy swore she saw something flicker in the colonel's eyes, a pain, a recognition, or maybe fear. Whatever it was, a deep sense of responsibility seemed to wash over his features. and Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that everything she and Toby had known until now was about to change forever. "Mommy?" Toby said quietly, glancing up at her. "I want to go home." Nancy's throat constricted. She forced a nod. "Yes, sweetie. We'll go soon." But as she helped Toby off the chair, Colonel Hudson spoke again, voice subdued. "Wait, let me help. We need a paternity test. We need answers." Nancy's heart twisted, torn between relief and dread. She knew Colonel Hudson's wealth and influence could either reveal a hidden truth or devastate them if Toby's claim proved impossible. But if Toby was right, this man was the father she'd never known how to find. Before she could respond, a burst of muffled chatter spilled in from the corridor, reminding them of the chaos outside. In the hush of that private room, Colonel Hudson stared at Toby, this child who had just derailed his perfectly orchestrated future. Nancy recognized that she stood on the precipice of the unknown, a step away from truths that might bring hope or heartbreak. Toby held the colonel's gaze bravely. The seconds stretched. Then the colonel rose, straightened his jacket, and pressed his lips together in a grim line. "Let me finish this engagement party formality," he muttered. "Then we'll talk. Tomorrow. Please, don't leave town." His words sounded more like a command than a request, but Nancy simply nodded, hardly trusting herself to speak. Gently gripping Toby's hand, she wondered if she'd just entered a battlefield more daunting than any the colonel had ever fought on. Nancy's head swirled with disbelief as she guided Toby through the corridors of the Veterans Club. The formal engagement music still droned from the main hall, punctuated by occasional bursts of polite laughter. Everyone was trying to pretend as though nothing earth-shattering had occurred, but Nancy could feel the tension lingering in the air like a low electric hum. The moment they stepped out of the small antechamber, they were greeted by a rush of murmurs. Guests and staff parted wordlessly, eyes darting to Toby and the colonel, who lingered momentarily behind them. In that instant, Nancy felt stripped bare. Her every step sounded heavier, as if the plush carpeting beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. She was desperate to leave the building, to escape the flood of gossip that had formed around her and her son. Yet Toby showed none of that fear. He clutched her hand tightly, using the other to hold his teddy bear pressed against his chest. His gaze skimmed across the sea of staring faces with a somber curiosity. Nancy wondered if her son even realized the enormity of what he had done. In one word, Dad, he had upended Colonel Robert Hudson's engagement, cracked open a secret that might or might not be real, and made Nancy question everything she believed about her own past. She inhaled slowly. Keep calm. She repeated the mantra in her mind, urging herself not to crumble in front of all these eyes. But the fiancé, her name was Sylvia, if Nancy recalled correctly, suddenly broke from a nearby group, striding toward them with venomous intent. Her elegant turquoise gown swayed like ocean waves around her ankles, and her expression brimmed with furious disbelief. "Are you quite finished causing a spectacle?" Sylvia snapped, voice trembling only slightly beneath her outrage. "I have no idea what game you're playing, Ms. Rowe, but don't think for a second you can blackmail your way into Robert's life. His generosity can only stretch so far." Nancy stiffened, bristling at the insinuation. "I don't want anything from him," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "And I never wanted to ruin your night. I'm just here because I was hired to cook." Sylvia's eyes flicked to Toby, who eyed her with quiet wonder. Nancy half expected her to hurl another cutting remark. Instead, Sylvia's lips curled in a forced, icy smile. "If you have any sense, Ms. Rowe, you'll leave peacefully. Go about your work, and keep your child's imagination under control." Before Nancy could respond, Colonel Hudson stepped into the hallway, arms folded across his chest. The conversation halted as Sylvia's gaze snapped to him. "Robert," she exclaimed, trying to soften her tone, "please tell me you have no doubt about this nonsense." The colonel's expression was unreadable, though tension radiated from him. "Sylvia," he said, quiet but resolute. "This isn't the time or place. I'll settle everything later." Sylvia's face fell, painted with betrayal. "Then, you don't deny wanting to see if this child could be yours?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. Her question echoed in the corridor, and a few onlookers edged closer in fascination. Nancy found her throat tight. She didn't want to be here, didn't want her son to witness this argument. Yet Toby stood resolute, as if something deeper than a child's logic guided him. Colonel Hudson let out a measured breath. "I need answers," he said finally. "That's all." He leveled a look at Nancy, slightly apologetic, slightly bewildered. "I asked them to stay in town. Tomorrow I'll arrange a test. If Toby isn't mine, we can dismiss this rumor at once. But if he is—" Sylvia's jaw clenched. "Then what? You'll just hand over money? Disband the wedding so you can play father to some— Her voice broke off, teetering between anger and heartbreak. A swirl of pity and frustration rose in Nancy's chest. She had no animosity toward this fiancé. In another universe, Nancy might have admired Sylvia's poised style, her confidence, and the generosity Colonel Hudson supposedly showed with his charities. But right now, she found herself in direct conflict with a woman who had every reason to hate her, and for reasons Nancy herself still couldn't fully comprehend. Colonel Hudson didn't respond. Instead, he shifted his gaze to Toby, who gently nuzzled his teddy bear. Something in the colonel's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, Nancy thought she detected guilt, or even longing. Then he turned to Nancy, speaking under the scrutiny of veterans and staff alike. "Please," he said, "let me assign a car to take you two home, or to your next stop. You shouldn't walk out alone. There may be reporters." Nancy's immediate reaction was to refuse. She didn't want more entanglements or to appear indebted to him. But from the corner of her eye, she saw the bright flash of a camera near the club's entrance. A few press members must have caught wind of the scandal, eager to snap a photo of the mystery child who'd just thrown a bomb into the night's festivities. She began, swallowing her pride. "All right. Thank you." Sylvia hissed in disapproval, pivoted on her heel, and stormed off. Colonel Hudson signaled to an assistant manager, who promptly left to arrange the transport. Nancy couldn't tear her eyes away from the swirling confusion on the colonel's face. He, too, was grappling with a reality that might forever alter the neat storyline he had built for himself. Footsteps approached, Toby's tiny, shined shoes tapping quietly on the polished floor. Her son seemed unbothered by the stairs. He simply slipped his hand into Nancy's, waiting for her to lead. The childlike trust in that gesture nearly undid her. She forced a tight smile and inclined her head at the colonel in polite thanks. "Good luck with your engagement," she murmured, though she felt foolish saying it. The engagement was the last thing on Colonel Hudson's mind, apparently. His quick nod was more automatic than sincere. "Thank you," he replied stiffly, "and tomorrow let's settle this once and for all." The ride home was silent. Nancy clutched Toby close in the back seat of the sleek black car, curtains drawn to block prying photographers. The driver, a uniformed employee of the Veterans Club, said nothing. Nancy sensed the swirl of questions in Toby's mind, but he remained quiet, perhaps sensing how shaken she was. She gently stroked his curls. "Are you okay, baby?" she whispered. Toby's brown eyes held an odd blend of resolve and sadness. "I'm okay, Mommy. You're scared." Nancy tried to smile. "Maybe a little," she admitted. A part of her wanted to question Toby right then and there. Where had he gotten the idea that Colonel Hudson was his father? Had he dreamed about that face? Had Toby seen a photograph on a magazine cover and simply latched onto the memory? She told herself to be rational. This had to be some confusion. But Toby's unwavering tone at the party replayed in her mind, gnawing at her doubts. When they finally reached their modest apartment building, Nancy thanked the driver and quickly ushered Toby up the dimly lit stairway to their second-floor apartment. The old steps creaked beneath them, A familiar sound after so many nights of coming home tired from cooking jobs. Inside, the worn furniture and faint aroma of tonight's leftover soup greeted them, starkly different from the sumptuous surroundings of the Veterans Club. Nancy set her purse on the tiny kitchen table, feeling a profound sense of relief just to be home. Toby padded toward his small bedroom with the unconscious routine of a child used to late nights. But before he disappeared into the room, Nancy called gently, "Toby? Wait." He paused in the hallway, turning back to her. Nancy sat on the edge of their lumpy couch, hands clasped. "Sweetie," she began carefully, "you know how much I love you, right?" Toby nodded solemnly. "And you know I never lied to you about your father. I told you he left before you were born, that I didn't really know him." Pain twisted in her gut. Though she'd always believed Toby's father had abandoned them, she realized how incomplete her memory actually was. She'd been so young and so frightened at the time, juggling hospital shifts, unplanned pregnancy, and not a soul to rely on. "I know, Mommy," Toby said softly. She hesitated, tears pricking her eyes. "Then why did you say the Colonel is your dad?" Toby's grip on his teddy bear tightened. For a moment he frowned as though searching for an explanation. "I dreamed about him a lot. A soldier in a hospital. He was hurt and he said he'd come back for me." Toby's voice was calm, like a child reciting a bedtime story. "When I saw him tonight, I felt it right here." He patted his small chest. "The same feeling from my dreams." Nancy's heart sank. She leaned forward, gently pulling Toby close. "Honey, sometimes dreams feel very real. But you and we've never met Colonel Hudson. At least I don't remember it." Toby's eyes welled with tears, but he shook his head stubbornly. "I know he's the one," he whispered. Nancy's arms tightened around him, her mind spinning. Could Toby's father have truly been someone so prominent? Someone who never even knew he had a son? She'd told Toby stories about the man who'd walked away from her in the hospital, some vague recollection of an argument, someone who vanished before she could beg him to stay. But she'd never had a name, never pressed for one. Everything was a blur after her frantic attempts to handle the birth on her own. She patted Toby's back, swallowing her doubts. "It's okay," she murmured, kissing his forehead. "We'll find out the truth. Just don't get your hopes up, all right? That test tomorrow, well, I don't want you hurt if things go differently than you expect." Toby nodded quietly, and his eyes fluttered closed as the night's exhaustion finally claimed him. Nancy rocked him gently, letting the silence of the apartment wrap around them. She tried to still her own frantic heartbeat. Tomorrow the Colonel would contact them. Tomorrow they might confirm Toby's father once and for all. Or they might unearth a misunderstanding so big it would shatter her son's trust. Either possibility terrified Nancy. The only thing she knew for sure was that their ordinary life would never be the same. When Toby had at last fallen asleep, Nancy carried him to his small bed and tucked him in, smoothing the blanket over his shoulders. She hovered there a moment, watching the steady rise and fall of her son's chest. Quietly, she retreated to the main room and sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Outside the window, the city lights blinked indifferently, offering no solace. Unanswered questions pummeled her thoughts. She had never yearned to find Toby's father before. Life had been simpler, just coping with daily survival. Now, in the flash of a single evening, the father might be Colonel Robert Hudson, a decorated veteran, a wealthy philanthropist, and an engaged man. Stomach twisting, Nancy wondered if Toby's dream-held certainty could be right. If so, she couldn't imagine the Colonel's fiancé or that horde of upper-crust onlookers welcoming her with open arms. She had no illusions about living in that world of gilded chandeliers, but it was too late to turn back. Toby deserved to know who his father was, deserved answers Nancy herself might have been too frightened to confront. She exhaled a trembling breath, glancing at the clock. Midnight. In a matter of hours, a swab of Toby's cheek or a simple blood test would set in motion events that might mend hearts, or break them irrevocably. "God, help me," she whispered into the dark. She reached for her phone on the table, half hoping to see a text from the colonel or from anyone, offering some clarity. But the screen was blank. There would be no easy resolution, not with the spotlight on them and a child's certain claim echoing in the ears of an entire community. Slumping against the cushions, Nancy closed her eyes, letting exhaustion overtake her. Tomorrow was coming too quickly, and she had never felt less prepared for what it might bring. Morning arrived sooner than Nancy would have liked. The restless hours of night had brought little in the way of solace. She awoke on the couch, stiff and worn, the rising sun casting a dim glow through the cheap blinds of her living room. For a moment, she forgot the tumult of the previous evening, until she spotted Toby's teddy bear resting on the table, exactly where he'd left it after stirring in his sleep. Then the flood of memories returned. They had no specific appointment set. Colonel Hudson had only said, "Tomorrow, let's settle this once and for all." Part of Nancy clung to the hope that maybe he'd forget, that maybe all of this would blow over. Yet she knew better. Toby's bold declaration in the Veterans Club had been too public. Colonel Hudson wouldn't simply ignore it, and neither would the hungry press. As Nancy brewed a small pot of coffee, her stomach rolled with nerves. She could imagine the local paper's headlines. Millionaire colonel's engagement in turmoil, mystery child claims paternity. Even the thought of such attention made her queasy, but she forced herself to focus on Toby, on the reason all of this was unfolding. Whether the colonel turned out to be the father or not, Toby deserved answers. In the adjacent room, she heard soft footsteps. Toby emerged, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His pajamas hung a bit short on him. He was growing so fast Nancy sometimes struggled to keep him in clothes that fit. He gave a tentative smile as though reading her thoughts. "Good morning, Mommy." Nancy set down her mug and offered him a gentle hug. "Morning, sweetie. Hungry?" He nodded, and she rustled around in their nearly bare pantry until she found cereal and milk that was still fresh enough. Toby ate quietly at the small kitchen table, swinging his legs as he stared at nothing in particular. Nancy tried to distract him with everyday talk, his favorite cartoons, the new reading assignments at school, but the conversation inevitably swung back to the colonel. "Will he call?" Toby asked between spoonfuls of cereal. Nancy exhaled, forcing calm. "If he said he would, I'm sure he will, but I really don't know what to expect." Toby glanced at her with a flicker of worry. "You think he's mad at us?" "Oh, honey." Nancy reached across the table to hold his hand. "I think he's confused. This all happened out of nowhere. He's got his own life, important business, and that fiancé. He's probably trying to figure out what to do." Toby processed that for a moment, his brow furrowing the way it often did when something weighed heavily on his mind. He returned to spooning cereal in silence. Nancy let him be, sensing that he needed space to mull over what he was feeling. By 8 o'clock, she was dressed in her usual day-off attire, simple jeans, a plain shirt, and a cardigan to ward off the morning chill. Toby changed into his neatest clothes, a pair of pressed pants and a button-up shirt that still fit from last school picture day. Nancy brushed his curls into place, thinking how he looked older somehow, as though the prior night had forced him into an unwanted maturity. Half an hour later, as if on cue, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her stomach flipped. Steeling her nerves, she swiped to accept the call. "Hello?" Colonel Hudson's voice came through, subdued. "Ms. Rowe?" Nancy swallowed. "Yes. Good morning, Colonel." A pause. Then he spoke quietly. "I've arranged for a discreet appointment at a private clinic on Elm Street. Paternity test. It's best to do it quickly with the press already buzzing. Do you think you and Toby can meet me there in an hour?" Nancy glanced at Toby. "Yes, we can, thank you." "Good," said the colonel. You'll find the clinic address in a text I'll send shortly. And Ms. Rowe—" He hesitated. "I appreciate you agreeing to this." He ended the call and Nancy stared at the phone. That was it. No small talk, no reassurance, just short instructions for a test that might alter Toby's entire upbringing. She realized her heart was pounding. "He wants us to go to a clinic," she told Toby, slipping the phone into her pocket. "For, the test." Toby set his spoon down gently, something shifting in his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. A tiny spark of hope flickered across his face. Nancy tried to keep a level voice. "We'll get some answers soon, honey. One way or another." They arrived at the small private clinic by taxi, stepping out onto a tree-lined street that felt worlds away from the bustle of downtown. A few discreet signs indicated specialized medical services, likely chosen by Colonel Hudson to limit the chance of paparazzi. Toby clutched Nancy's hand and she noticed how sweaty his little palm felt. She gave him a reassuring squeeze. Upon entering, a soft chime sounded over the clinic door. The waiting area was nearly empty, just a quiet, well-lit room with plush chairs and a potted fern in one corner. A middle-aged receptionist in pastel scrubs looked up, offering a polite smile. "Ms. Rowe?" she asked gently. Nancy nodded. "This way, please." They followed her down a short hallway, then into a private consultation room. Inside, Colonel Robert Hudson was already seated, wearing a sober gray suit rather than the military dress uniform or gala attire Nancy had seen him in the previous night. He looked tired, as though he too had slept poorly. He rose politely when Nancy and Toby entered. "Good morning," he said, voice subdued. He eyed Toby briefly, a flicker of uncertain warmth in his gaze before turning to Nancy. "Thank you for coming." Nancy forced a smile, trying not to let her nerves show. "Thank you for arranging this." Toby stayed close, half hiding behind Nancy's leg. It was the first time Nancy had seen him appear shy around the colonel. The difference between Toby's fearless statement last night and his bashful stance now made Nancy's heart ache. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. A doctor, a thin man with silver glasses, stepped in. "Good morning," he greeted, adjusting his lab coat. "Colonel Hudson, Ms. Rowe, Toby." He offered Toby a friendly nod. "We're just going to do a quick cheek swab, all right?" Toby looked at Nancy for confirmation, and she encouraged him with a nod. The procedure went by in a blur. A simple, sterile swab rubbed along the inside of Toby's cheek, then the same for Colonel Hudson. Nancy watched closely, feeling her heart flutter each time Toby locked eyes with the colonel. Was Toby seeing the father he believed in, or just a stranger? After labeling the samples carefully, the doctor said, "We'll process these. Typically, results can take a few days, but per Colonel Hudson's request, we'll expedite the analysis and have an answer by tomorrow. Is that acceptable?" Nancy nodded silently. Colonel Hudson gave a curt nod in return. Then came an awkward pause. The doctor left, shutting the door behind him, leaving them alone in that small consultation room. Toby's gaze hopped from Nancy to the colonel, as though expecting some immediate reaction. An instant bond, maybe. Colonel Hudson cleared his throat. "Toby," he said, mustering a gentle tone, "that wasn't so bad, was it?" Toby shook his head. Then a quiet, blunt question escaped him. "Are you scared?" The colonel looked taken aback. "Why would I be scared?" Toby shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. "Mommy says you have a lot to lose. I heard her talking on the phone last night. She said you were important and engaged in big news." Nancy felt her cheeks warm. She must have been venting to a friend in hushed tones. Or maybe Toby overheard a snippet of conversation. Either way, it clearly resonated with him. A flicker of discomfort crossed the colonel's face. He parted his lips, about to respond, but a voice from the hallway intervened. "Robert?" Sylvia, the fiancée, stood in the doorway. She wore a stylish cream-colored pantsuit and carried herself with rigid poise. Nancy's stomach knotted at the sight of her, so she'd come too. Colonel Hudson straightened, his shoulders tense. "Sylvia, I thought we agreed." "I just wanted to be sure," Sylvia said tight-lipped. "Sure you weren't being manipulated into something?" Her gaze swept across Nancy, then landed on Toby. Toby stared back with wide eyes, hugging his teddy bear. Nancy braced herself for an icy remark, but Sylvia paused, as though some shred of restraint held her back. "So the test is done?" she managed, glancing at the colonel. He nodded. "We'll know tomorrow." Sylvia exhaled in what sounded like sheer frustration. She looked around, ignoring Nancy and Toby. "Then can we please go? There's a swarm of reporters forming near the gates. The driver says we'll need to circle around the block just to get out quietly." He nodded again, turning slightly toward Nancy and Toby. "Did you both need a ride?" he asked quietly, forcing politeness. "My driver can drop you somewhere safe." Nancy pressed her lips together. She'd been prepared to hail another taxi, but outside they might face the press alone, an idea that made her insides churn. "Yes," she agreed softly, ignoring the stony glare Sylvia threw her. "If it's not an inconvenience." Sylvia gave a clipped, humorless laugh. "Inconvenience?" "Not at all," she said, her tone dripping with irony. "It's only costing us our entire morning, not to mention the scene outside. But why not?" Nancy felt Toby's hand slip into hers again, and she did her best to hold her composure. Colonel Hudson glanced from Sylvia to Nancy, then back again, conflict etched in his eyes. "Come on," he said at last, ushering them out. "We'll figure this out. We just need to get through one more day." At the parking area behind the clinic, a sleek black SUV waited with tinted windows. The colonel's driver stood by, scanning the perimeter. Seeing them approach, he opened the door. But an instant hush fell as they realized a handful of reporters had somehow found the entrance. Cameras flashed. Shouts rang out. "Colonel Hudson, is it true you have an illegitimate son?" "Sylvia, how does this affect the wedding?" Ma'am, can you confirm if your child belongs to the colonel?" Nancy's breath caught. She instinctively tightened her hold on Toby's shoulders, pushing him gently behind her. Toby trembled, but didn't cry. Colonel Hudson's jaw hardened, and he waved his driver to hurry. Meanwhile, Sylvia snapped, "No comment," in clipped syllables. They managed to get Toby inside first. Nancy slid in after him, followed by Sylvia, and lastly, Colonel Hudson himself. The door slammed shut, muffling the cacophony of questions. Nancy's pulse pounded. Out the window, cameras continued to flash, and men with notepads pressed against the glass, desperate for a quote. "Go," Sylvia ordered the driver. He nodded, pulling out at a brisk pace, weaving around the few reporters who blocked the driveway. Within moments, they sped down the street, leaving the frantic shouts behind. Inside the SUV, the tension felt thicker than ever. Sylvia's gaze bored into Nancy with unconcealed animosity, but Colonel Hudson cut off any confrontation by clearing his throat. "I'm sorry for that scene," he said, not looking at either of the women. "The press, they feed on scandal." Nancy murmured a faint acknowledgement. Toby pressed his nose to the window, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Will they come to our house?" he asked quietly. Sylvia sucked in a breath as though to retort with something cutting, but the colonel spoke first. "We can have security posted, Toby," he offered gently. "I won't let them bother you." Nancy inhaled, grateful and wary at once. The last thing she wanted was private guards standing outside her humble apartment building. Neighbors would talk, her landlord would demand explanations. But the moment she opened her mouth to protest, Toby turned toward Colonel Hudson with timid gratitude in his eyes. Her heart twisted at the unexpected bond forming between them, a bond that might dissolve if the test results proved negative, or if it proved positive and changed everything. She forced herself to speak. "Thank you, Colonel. But maybe it's best if we just lay low. I don't want any more fuss." He nodded, though his gaze remained on Toby, as though reading the boy's every subtle expression. Sylvia folded her arms, clearly unhappy with the entire situation. Nobody else spoke for the remainder of the drive. When they neared Nancy's street, Colonel Hudson broke the silence. "We'll drop you off here," he said, voice subdued. "You still have my number, Ms. Rowe? Tomorrow evening the lab will call. We'll meet again in private for the results. And—" He paused, inhaling as though steadying himself. "No matter what they show, I want you to know." He stopped, biting his lip. "It's best we talk after we have an answer," he finished, not meeting her eyes. Nancy nodded stiffly. The SUV eased to a stop. Outside, the block appeared quiet, no press in sight. She murmured thanks, then helped Toby out. From the curb, they watched the vehicle glide away, Colonel Hudson's profile barely visible behind tinted windows. In the front seat, Sylvia's silhouette remained rigid, not glancing back. Toby said nothing all the way up the stairs to their apartment. Once inside, he flopped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. Nancy lowered herself into the worn armchair, numb with exhaustion. The test was done. 24 hours from now, they'd have clarity, like it or not. Across the living room, Toby turned his head to meet her gaze. "Mommy," he said, as if recentering on the only security he truly had. She rose from the chair, moved to the couch, and wrapped him in a warm hug. For a while, neither spoke. They just breathed, each aware that the next day's revelation might split their world wide open, or maybe in some strange way bring them closer to a truth Nancy had never known she needed. Nancy couldn't shake the sense that time stood still. After returning from the clinic, the hours crept forward in agonizing slowness. She tidied the apartment, washing dishes, wiping counters, folding laundry, just to keep her restless mind busy. Toby alternated between helping her and sinking into his own thoughts, occasionally drifting to his bedroom to fiddle with crayons or stare out the window. By mid-afternoon, Nancy was at the tiny kitchen table, trying to review her finances for the month. The numbers refused to add up. She'd banked on the Veterans Club job to carry them through a few weeks, but after the scandalous turn of events, Nancy wondered if her services were still wanted at all. A lump formed in her throat at the idea that she might have to find new work, another business that needed catering, or perhaps a diner in search of a cook. Yet fear of the future was overshadowed by a deeper question. Would Toby's father actually turn out to be the powerful, soon-to-be-married Colonel Robert Hudson? She set the bills aside and closed her eyes, pressing her palms against them. Could she truly have met Hudson 8 years ago in some hospital hallway? The memory of that time was so hazy. Her exhaustion, the strain of juggling a menial hospital kitchen job, her heartbreak at an unexpected pregnancy. She remembered feeling alone, never once suspecting a wealthy man might be connected to it. It seemed impossible. Yet Toby's determination gnawed at her. He was rarely this certain of anything, let alone a person he'd only just seen. The phone buzzed on the table. Nancy jumped, half expecting the colonel or the lab with results. Instead, she recognized the cheerful voice of her friend Carla, who often helped watch Toby when Nancy took evening shifts. "Girl, I saw the news. Are you okay?" Carla blurted, not bothering with small talk. "Social media is blowing up about that colonel guy. People keep sharing pictures from the engagement party where Toby pointed at him. It's a mess." Nancy felt her heartbeat spike. "I'm managing," she said unconvincingly. "This is all so strange, Carla. We did a paternity test this morning." "Wow," Carla's breath hissed through the receiver. "I can't imagine what's going on in your head right now. That fiancé of his must be freaking out." Nancy pinched the bridge of her nose. "She definitely wasn't thrilled when we saw her at the clinic. I think she hates me and I barely even know her." Carla sighed. "Girl, you have to take care of yourself and Toby. The press is only going to get crazier, especially if it turns out Toby is the colonel's child. Do you need me to come over? I can bring groceries or help around the house." Tears pricked Nancy's eyes. She felt immensely grateful for Carla's kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, voice unsteady. "I'll let you know. Right now we're just waiting." Carla paused, then spoke more quietly. "Be careful, Nancy. Sometimes when powerful people feel cornered, they do things you wouldn't expect. I don't know that Colonel, but you never know who's advising him in the background." Nancy's stomach knotted at the warning. "I understand," she murmured. "We'll keep our heads down. Thank you, Carla." Hanging up, Nancy leaned back in the chair, listening to Toby's soft humming from his bedroom. Carla's words lingered. She realized that even if Colonel Hudson was well-intentioned, others, like the fiancé or business associates, might not take kindly to a revelation that threatened his pristine public image. Still, Colonel Hudson's calm, albeit pained expression stayed with her. He hadn't seemed cruel or vengeful, just unsettled. She stood, walked to Toby's door, and tapped lightly. "Mind if I come in?" He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring a rudimentary drawing of 3 figures: a woman, a boy, and a tall man in a green uniform. Nancy's chest tightened. Toby looked up, cheeks flushing as though she'd caught him in a private act. "It's okay," he said, setting his crayons aside. Nancy settled onto the worn rug. "What you drawing?" she asked softly, though she already suspected the answer. Toby bit his lip, glancing at the paper. "Us," he admitted. "Me, you, and him." His small finger tapped the green uniformed figure. "I don't remember exactly how the dreams looked, but I keep seeing him in something army-like. So I drew it." Nancy stroked his hair. "I understand." She wanted to say more, wanted to reassure him that no matter the test results, she'd remain by his side. But Toby's eyes were filled with that quiet, resolute quality she'd seen in him ever since last night. "Mommy," Toby said, voice trembling slightly, "what if the test comes back and he isn't my dad? Then who is?" A stab of pain pierced her heart. She gathered him in her arms, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. "Baby, I wish I had the perfect answer, but I don't. We'll face it together, okay?" He nodded, clinging to her. For a while, they just sat there on the floor, mother and son, lost in uncertainty. By late evening, Nancy found herself pacing the living room, too restless to sleep. Toby had gone to bed, his usual bedtime routine oddly subdued, as though the tension weighed on him too. She debated calling Colonel Hudson to ask if he'd heard anything prematurely from the lab, but that felt futile. The doctor said tomorrow, no earlier. Her gaze drifted to the small TV set, usually tuned to a cooking channel or cartoons for Toby. She wondered if the local news was broadcasting speculation about the Colonel's paternity scandal. Her hand hovered over the remote, uncertain whether she should subject herself to more anxiety. In the end, curiosity won out. She turned it on and flipped through channels until she found the local station's late broadcast. She gasped. There it was. A brief segment featuring a grainy photo taken at the Veterans Club engagement party, capturing Toby's outstretched arm pointing at Colonel Hudson. The headline read, "Engagement Shock. Local philanthropist's wedding in question after surprise child claim." Nancy's stomach twisted. The anchor's polished voice summarized the rumored situation. Colonel Robert Hudson, known for his philanthropic work, faced allegations that a young boy might be his son. The fiancé, a well-regarded society figure, had not commented formally. Rumors swirled that a paternity test had been rushed. The anchor finished the segment by stating they would update viewers once more facts emerged. Feeling slightly ill, Nancy turned off the TV. The tension in her neck flared, and she sank onto the couch. Carla was right. This was only going to get more intense if Toby really was the Colonel's child. Nancy's privacy, her normal life, they might vanish under a barrage of headlines and speculation. Yet through the fear, a glimmer of stubborn resolve flickered. If Toby's father was indeed Colonel Hudson, he deserved to know his son, and Toby deserved a chance at whatever relationship might follow. Nancy might be a humble cook with limited means, but she wouldn't let fear alone dictate her next steps. She rubbed tired eyes and glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Another long night loomed, but eventually exhaustion overtook her. She dozed off with the TV remote still in hand, drifting into a fitful sleep. The next day arrived with a dull hush. Rays of morning sun leaked through the blinds as Nancy roused herself. The newscast images flashed through her mind as she woke, setting her nerves on edge. Toby was still asleep, so she tiptoed around preparing a simple breakfast. Today was the day the clinic would call, the day the truth would finally crystallize in black and white. Shortly after 9, her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, heart pounding. But it was only a telemarketer. She exhaled shakily, scolding herself for jumping to conclusions. Toby emerged from his bedroom dressed in the same button-up from the day before, which he must have carefully laid out. She noted how serious he seemed, like a soldier dressing for an inspection. They ate breakfast together, milk and toast, plus the last of the peanut butter. The quiet was broken only by Toby's small voice. "Do you think he already got his call?" Nancy shrugged, not wanting to guess. "If he did, I'm sure he'll let us know." Just as Toby finished the last bite of toast, the phone buzzed again. Nancy jerked in surprise, nearly spilling her coffee. She hurried to answer, dread and anticipation roiling in equal measure. "This is Dr. Haddon from the clinic," said the calm voice on the other end. "Miss Rowe?" "Yes," Nancy croaked, motioning for Toby to come closer. He hurried to her side, eyes wide. "I have results from the paternity test." The doctor's tone was neutral. "The colonel has also been informed. He asked me to let you know that he would prefer to meet in person to discuss them with you." Nancy's heart thudded. "I see." A wave of relief that the results were finally in mingled with a spike of fear. The truth was here. "Did he say where to meet?" "Yes. He requested that you both come to his estate. He said the grounds are private so you can speak without intrusion. I'm sorry if this is sudden, but he believed it was best." Nancy glanced at Toby, who stood rigid with anticipation. "All right," she managed. "We can be there. Thank you, Doctor." Ending the call, she sank into a chair. Toby's face mirrored the swirl of emotions inside her. "We'll find out today," she said. "He wants us to go to his house." Toby's breath caught. "He has a big house?" She nodded. "Probably. He's wealthy." Her mind reeled with the idea of stepping foot on Colonel Hudson's estate. Perhaps Sylvia would be there. Perhaps the press would stake out the gates. Perhaps they'd walk into a trap of cameras and questions, but they had to do it. Toby deserved closure. "I'll call a taxi, or maybe we can take a bus," Nancy murmured. "We'll go. Today." Toby's small hand closed around hers, a gesture of reassurance that felt almost reversed from the norm. This time his eyes flickered with a silent message. "We can do this." Nancy nodded, standing to gather what little they'd need. She quickly changed into a simple floral blouse and tidy slacks, tying her hair into a low ponytail. For Toby, she found his best pair of shoes, the ones that still pinched a bit but looked presentable. Before they left, Nancy wrote a quick note to Carla in case her friend stopped by, explaining they'd gone to see Colonel Hudson about the test results. Then she led Toby outside. The sun shone bright, a deceptively cheerful contrast to Nancy's churning nerves. A short while later, they stood at the curb as an old taxi rattled to a stop. Nancy helped Toby into the back seat and gave the driver the address. The colonel's estate was in an upscale neighborhood she'd only read about. Mansions hidden by tall hedges and winding driveways, a part of town she never expected to visit. The ride felt surreal. Toby gazed out the window, his expression unreadable. Nancy gripped her purse, knees bouncing anxiously. Every so often, the driver cast them curious glances through the rearview mirror. She could guess he'd recognized the street name, probably figuring out they were headed to the infamous Colonel's domain. But he said nothing, and Nancy was grateful for the silence. When they finally turned onto a private lane lined with enormous sycamore trees, Nancy's heartbeat quickened. The taxi rolled up to a pair of ornate iron gates set in a tall brick wall. A security camera swiveled above, and a discreet speaker buzzed to life. "State your name," came a low, tinny voice. "Nancy Rowe, and Toby," she managed, leaning out the window. "We're expected." A pause. Then, with a gentle whir, the gates swung open. The taxi proceeded slowly up a long driveway, revealing a sprawling lawn dotted with manicured hedges and blooming rose bushes. The house itself was a grand, colonial-style mansion with tall white columns. Nancy's breath caught. She'd never seen such a place except in glossy magazines. Toby gawked out the window, lips parted. Nancy swallowed, bracing herself. This was the Colonel's home, his private sanctuary, now the stage for a revelation that might change all their lives. The taxi halted at the circular driveway near the mansion's entrance. Before Nancy could pay, a uniformed attendant materialized to open the car door. She thanked him softly, stepping out and helping Toby. The attendant guided them inside, where the hush of wealth enveloped them. Marble floors, polished banisters, and a vaulted ceiling that dwarfed their every movement. Nancy's heart thudded so loudly she could barely think. Toby clung to her side, wide-eyed. A woman in a crisp black suit, an estate manager perhaps, approached with a polite smile, leading them through a silent corridor into what appeared to be a drawing room. Plush chairs, tasteful artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Nancy felt as though she'd walked into a different world. "Please wait here," the estate manager said in hushed tones. "The Colonel will join you shortly." She slipped out, leaving Nancy and Toby alone in that sumptuously decorated room. Toby moved close to the windows, peering at a distant fountain in the garden. Nancy exhaled a shaky breath, hands twisting in her lap. The walls felt too grand, the house too large, the moment too consequential. Would Colonel Hudson deliver the news kindly if Toby wasn't his son? Or if he was? Nancy tried to steady the swirl of speculation. One thing was certain, they would know, once and for all. She scooted to the edge of her seat, reaching for Toby's hand. He took it and they shared a silent look of courage. Somewhere in the mansion's halls, the Colonel was preparing himself too. The next minutes might define everything. Nancy didn't realize she was holding her breath until she heard footsteps approach. She glanced at Toby, who sat perched on the edge of a velvety armchair, his small hands clasped around the teddy bear he'd insisted on bringing. Outside the tall windows, garden shrubs rustled in a mild breeze. Inside, the stillness felt like it could shatter at any second. The double doors at the far end of the drawing room opened to reveal Colonel Robert Hudson. He paused just inside the threshold, letting the doors slide shut behind him. His expression was guarded, part regret, part resolve. He wasn't dressed in his usual suits or military uniform. Instead, he wore a simple sweater and slacks, as though he wanted no formalities for this moment. Nancy found her pulse racing and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the envelope he held. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Rowe." "Toby," he greeted quietly, crossing the polished floor. Nancy rose to her feet, swallowing against the dryness in her throat. "Colonel?" Toby remained seated, knuckles whitening around the teddy bear's fuzzy arm. She gently touched her son's shoulder, guiding him to stand. Colonel Hudson gave Toby a small nod. "It's good to see you again. I suppose we should speak privately." He glanced around as if searching for the right words. The hush of the room made the moment even heavier. Sylvia had to step out. She thought it best we handle this first, just us. Nancy struggled for a polite reply, only managing a faint, "All right." Her gaze flicked to the envelope. That must be it. The official results from the lab. The realization tightened her chest. The colonel gestured to a sofa near the large window. "Shall we sit?" His tone was subdued, but Nancy detected underlying tension. She took a seat, positioning Toby beside her. Colonel Hudson sank opposite them in a stately armchair. The envelope lay across his lap, a silent piece of paper that would shape their future. He exhaled, tapping the envelope lightly. "Before I open this," he began, "I want you both to know, no matter what it says, I hope we can have an honest conversation about next steps." His eyes settled on Toby, who stared back, silent. Nancy's pulse hammered. When she spoke, her own voice sounded distant. "I appreciate that. It's what I want too. But Toby and we're prepared for whatever it is." Toby said nothing, only angled his shoulders forward. Part of Nancy wondered if he was replaying the dreamlike images of the soldier in his mind, convinced that the colonel was that very man. Would those dreams disintegrate if the test proved otherwise? Colonel Hudson unsealed the envelope. For a heart-stopping moment, no one moved. He slipped out a folded sheet of paper, eyes scanning the text. Nancy braced herself, every muscle tensing. She watched the colonel's jaw tighten, then slowly release. His gaze flickered with conflicting emotions. Shock, perhaps relief, perhaps fear. He looked up, meeting Nancy's eyes. "It's positive," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. "Toby is my son." Time slowed. Nancy felt her heart stumble in her chest as she tried to process the words. Toby's father. This man seated in a grand mansion at the center of a wealthy public life. It was real. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her mind reeling with the knowledge that Toby's unwavering belief had been correct all along. Toby gripped her hand. His eyes filled with a strange mixture of triumph and tears. He didn't leap with joy or speak immediately. Instead, he breathed out as though letting go of a weight he'd carried. "You are my dad," he whispered. Colonel Hudson set the paper aside, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Toby, I can't begin to explain how this is possible. My memory of that time is incomplete, but the lab doesn't lie. We share the same DNA." His voice grew ragged with emotion. Nancy swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing words out. "I didn't realize it was you," she murmured. I told Toby I didn't know who his father was. I never would have kept it from you on purpose." The shock was so profound she could barely think straight. "You said you were in a hospital back then, that you'd been injured?" "I worked in a hospital kitchen the year Toby was conceived. I must have seen you. I don't know." The colonel opened his mouth, then closed it, as though wrestling with an unseen memory. 8 years ago, after my last overseas tour, I spent months in and out of a military hospital stateside. It was a tough time. I had a head injury, gaps in my recall. He exhaled slowly, eyes clouded. "But there must have been a connection with you I couldn't hold on to, something we never followed up on." Nancy lowered her head, tears pricking her eyes. She remembered how lonely and frantic those nights had been, working double shifts just to keep afloat. If their paths had crossed, even briefly, maybe they'd parted ways before realizing anything had formed between them. Toby let go of Nancy's hand and stepped closer to the colonel. It was a tentative movement, as if testing the waters. Colonel Hudson reached out, gently resting a large, steady hand on Toby's shoulder. For a moment, father and son simply looked at each other, a silent bond weaving between them. "I don't know what to say," Colonel Hudson murmured. "My mind is spinning, but I know this changes everything." His gaze slid to Nancy, a swirl of conflicting emotions in his eyes. "You must let me help you, both of you. Toby is my responsibility, my child. I'll do whatever I can." A swirl of relief and panic coursed through Nancy. She wanted Toby to have the father he deserved, yet the enormity of the Colonel's life, the wealth, the social standing, the fiancé, threatened to swallow them whole. "I want Toby to know you," she said, trembling. "But this is your engagement, your world. It's not simple." Colonel Hudson's expression tightened. "I'm aware. Sylvia, my fiancée, she doesn't take kindly to surprises. But Toby didn't ask for this. Neither did you. So if she can't accept that, I don't know." He trailed off, hands curling into tense fists. Toby looked up, confusion darkening his small features. "Will that lady be mad at you? Because of me?" Nancy's heart clenched at the worry in his voice. Colonel Hudson reached and ruffled Toby's hair, an awkward, timid gesture, as if learning how to be a father in real time. "She's not mad at you, Toby. She's upset this happened so suddenly, but we'll figure it out. The important thing is you." Silence stretched, filled with the weight of possibilities. Nancy's mind spun with the practicalities. Toby's schooling, where they lived, how the Colonel's involvement might disrupt their day-to-day lives, and overshadowing it all was the inevitability of media uproar. If the local press had already run stories before, the actual paternity confirmation would spark a frenzy. She swallowed. "Toby has school. I have jobs. Well, I did. I'm not sure I still do after all the gossip. We can't just uproot everything." The Colonel nodded, pushing to his feet and pacing near the window. "I'm not expecting you to. Let's take this one step at a time. My estate is secure. You're welcome to stay here temporarily if you wish so the reporters can't hound you. But I won't force you. If you'd rather remain at home, I'll hire private security. I can handle their pay." Nancy's cheeks heated at the notion of living in his mansion or having bodyguards outside her modest apartment. The idea seemed both comforting and terrifying. I don't know," she confessed. "I appreciate the offer, but everything's happening so fast." Toby broke in softly. "Mommy, maybe we should stay somewhere safe for a little while." Her chest constricted. She recognized the fear behind his words. Fear of cameras, of strangers, of losing the fragile normalcy they had. Meeting Toby's gaze, she slowly nodded. "Maybe we could for a short period. Just until things calm down." Colonel Hudson nodded, relief flickering in his expression. "You'd have privacy here, or in the guest house near the back of the property. It's more modest. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen. I keep it for visiting relatives. That might be less daunting than this main house." Nancy tried to imagine a guest house on this estate, likely larger than her entire apartment. She swallowed. "We'll consider it," she said carefully. "But I don't want Toby to miss school. If we were to move, we'd need to figure out transportation, or how close we are to the bus route." "I can arrange it," the Colonel interjected. "Whatever Toby needs." His readiness to fix everything left her both grateful and wary. "We'll talk about it," she repeated. "Thank you." A subdued hush reclaimed the room. Toby, looking drained, eased onto the sofa. Colonel Hudson approached, lowering himself onto one knee before the boy. "Toby," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry I wasn't there all these years. I didn't know. But from now on, I promise, I'll be here for you." Toby's lip quivered, and tears sprang to his eyes. He flung himself against the Colonel in a sudden embrace, burying his face into the man's shoulder. Startled, Colonel Hudson wrapped his arms around Toby with gentle firmness. Nancy felt her own tears slip free, unstoppable at the sight of her son, so desperate for a father, clinging to this man who was no longer a stranger. Time seemed suspended in that heartfelt moment. The late morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the father and child. Nancy pressed a hand over her mouth, overcome with a dizzy mixture of relief, hope, and fear. When Toby finally pulled back, Colonel Hudson's eyes were damp. He swallowed, gathering composure. "I'll ask Mrs. Parker, my estate manager, to show you the guest house. You can decide if it's suitable. Meanwhile, we'll have to handle the press carefully. They're going to ask questions, but we can manage that. As for my engagement," he hesitated, expression conflicted. "I have to speak with Sylvia, work out how this changes our plans." Nancy's heart squeezed. She'd almost forgotten about that, or rather, tried not to dwell on it. The Colonel was days, maybe weeks, away from marrying another woman, and now Toby's existence put them all in uncharted territory. She found no easy words, so she simply nodded. Within minutes, the Colonel excused himself to contact the estate manager. Nancy lingered beside Toby, who stared at the painting on the wall, an oil landscape of rolling fields. He squeezed her hand with new firmness. She squeezed back, the flood of emotions making her dizzy. "It's real, Mommy," he whispered. "He's really my dad." Nancy brushed a tear from his cheek. "Yes, baby," she murmured, voice trembling. "He really is." But as she pulled Toby close, her mind churned with the uncertain reality that awaited them. Yes, Colonel Hudson was Toby's father. Yes, he wanted to help. Yet the complexities of his high-profile life, his fiancée, the press, and all that followed, threatened to upend the safe, simple world Nancy had worked so hard to build. Still, as she gazed at Toby's contented face, she realized there was no going back. The truth was out, and the path forward, however winding, was something they would have to walk together. Nancy stood on the threshold of the guest house, taking in the quaint little building tucked behind the mansion's main gardens. Contrary to her expectations, it was modest and surprisingly cozy, much more welcoming than the intimidating grandeur of the main house. A winding stone path led from the rear lawns, past carefully cultivated flower beds, to the front door. The estate manager, Mrs. Parker, walked ahead, jingling a set of keys. "We keep it ready for visiting relatives," Mrs. Parker explained, her crisp voice echoing slightly in the quiet. "The Colonel asked me to show you around. You and Toby may stay here as long as you need." Nancy swallowed the knot in her throat. She glanced over at Toby, who was taking in every detail, the vines crawling up a trellis near the door, the blossoms nodding in the breeze. "It's lovely," Nancy said softly, stepping inside once Mrs. Parker unlocked the door. The interior was simple compared to the mansion's ornate style. Still, it felt large and elegant to Nancy. Polished hardwood floors, tall windows letting in plenty of light, 2 small bedrooms, and a neat living area with a comfortable sofa. In the adjoining kitchen, stainless steel appliances gleamed, certainly nicer than anything in Nancy's current apartment. She ran her hand over the smooth countertop, a swirl of conflicting emotions tightening her chest. Mrs. Parker gave them a polite smile. "Fresh linens are in the closet. If you need groceries, I'll have them delivered immediately. The Colonel wants you to be comfortable." She paused, reading Nancy's uneasy expression. "Are there any questions, Miss Rowe?" Nancy forced a smile. "Not at the moment, thank you," she replied, glancing at Toby, who was curiously peeking into the bedrooms. "We just need time to settle in." Mrs. Parker offered a respectful nod. "Of course. I'll be in the main house if you require anything. Colonel Hudson will join you soon once he's finished a phone call." With that, she handed over the keys and departed, shutting the door behind her. For a moment, Nancy and Toby stood in silence, just absorbing the unfamiliar space. She could hear the faint rustle of leaves outside. Even from here, the soft trickle of a garden fountain reached her ears. It all felt so surreal, as though they'd stepped into a place they didn't quite belong. "Mommy, this is nice," Toby observed, edging into what would presumably be his bedroom. He re-emerged moments later, eyes shining. "There's a desk, and books." Indeed, in one corner of the guest room sat a modest bookshelf stocked with classic children's stories. Nancy's lip curved in a tentative smile. "It's very nice," she agreed. Yet worry laced her voice. Would living here be wise, or would it entangle them deeper in the Colonel's complicated life? She reminded herself it was only temporary, just until the media furor cooled. Then again, she had no illusions about how quickly curiosity might fade, especially once the press learned that the test results confirmed Toby's paternity. "Mommy?" Toby asked gently, stepping close. "Are you upset?" She blinked, forcing composure. "No, honey, I'm just overwhelmed." Sitting on the couch, she patted the cushion for Toby to join her. When he did, she wrapped an arm around him. "This is all happening so fast. It's good that your dad wants us here, safe from reporters. But you know our life might change a lot, right?" Toby nodded, twining his fingers around the teddy bear's ear. "I like the idea of having a dad," he whispered, shy but resolute. "But I'm worried about that lady. She didn't look happy." A flicker of anxiety gripped Nancy. She smoothed Toby's curls, remembering Sylvia's stony glare at the clinic. "Sylvia," she said quietly, "she and the colonel have been planning a wedding. Finding out about you, that must have been a big shock." She tried to speak carefully, wanting Toby to see the bigger picture without feeling guilty. "We'll have to see how it all works out." In truth, Nancy had no idea how Sylvia would react now that Toby was undeniably Robert Hudson's child. She pictured the confrontation that might be looming: an expensive ring, a carefully scheduled ceremony, guests invited from across the state, only for the groom to discover he had a son from a lost chapter of his life. It would be an upheaval for anyone. Suddenly, a gentle rap sounded on the door. Nancy's heart jolted. Toby tensed, pressing a little closer to her side. She cleared her throat. "Come in?" The door eased open. Colonel Hudson peered around it, offering a subdued smile. "May I?" "Yes," Nancy said, standing. Toby stayed on the couch, still clutching his teddy. The colonel stepped in, gaze wandering over the tidy living room. "I hope this is suitable," he murmured, sliding his hands into his pockets. "I imagine it might feel overwhelming, but I want you two to feel at home." Nancy exhaled slowly. "Thank you. It's more than we're used to," she admitted. He cleared his throat, nodding toward Toby. "Do you like your new room, Toby?" he asked, trying a warmer tone. Toby nodded, giving a small smile. "It's cool," he said. "Thanks." For a moment, an awkward hush followed. Then Colonel Hudson turned to Nancy, his expression turning serious. "Could we talk in the kitchen, alone?" She glanced at Toby, uncertain. He nodded encouragingly, hugging the teddy bear for comfort. Reluctantly, Nancy followed the colonel down the short hallway. They ended up in the guest house's compact kitchen, standing near the counter. The colonel touched a wooden bar stool, then thought better of it and remained standing. "I just got off the phone with my PR advisor," he began, voice low. "Word about the test results is going to leak soon if it hasn't already. The clinic staff is discreet, but speculation is swirling. I suspect some official statement might be best, to control the narrative." Nancy swallowed. She hated the thought of Toby being a narrative or a news story. Still, she recognized the reality of Colonel Hudson's high-profile existence. "What kind of statement?" she asked warily. He grimaced, rubbing the back of his neck. "One acknowledging Toby is my son, that we've only recently discovered the truth and that I intend to support him fully. That's it. We don't have to mention anything about you or the circumstances beyond that." Nancy's stomach knotted. "But the press will want details. They'll want to paint me as—" She broke off, not wanting to say the words. "A gold digger, a mistress, some scandalous fling." The colonel's eyes flickered with empathy. "I know," he said gently. "I won't let them slander you. My team will be careful in how they phrase everything, but I can't stop people from speculating. Gossip has a life of its own." Nancy nodded stiffly, pressing her lips together. "I understand." He exhaled, leaning against the counter. "I also need to speak with Sylvia," he murmured, voice thick with tension. "She's out right now, likely confiding in her parents. This may change our wedding plans, maybe postponement, maybe worse. I owe her an explanation." Nancy's heart pinched. She folded her arms, longing to assure him it was fine, that Toby and she never intended to ruin a wedding. But words stuck in her throat. There was no easy fix, no tidy resolution. Toby existed, and that alone rewrote all their stories. Colonel Hudson studied her. "You look exhausted," he said softly. "Let me call some staff to bring a meal. You must be hungry." "I can manage," Nancy replied automatically. She'd always prided herself on her self-sufficiency, cooking her own meals. But in that moment, she realized she had no groceries here. The Colonel's kindness felt foreign. "I suppose if it's not too much trouble." She relented. He nodded, taking out his phone. "Just a moment." While he dialed, Nancy glanced back toward the living room. She could see Toby's silhouette in the soft lamplight, hugging his teddy and staring at the empty fireplace. Her chest ached at how small and vulnerable he looked in this unfamiliar place. Colonel Hudson finished speaking with a staff member promising hot food within the hour. Then his gaze lingered on Nancy once more. "I'm sorry," he said, an undercurrent of raw sincerity in his tone. "I wish I had known. I can't imagine the burdens you've carried alone." Nancy swallowed hard, eyes stinging. "I've managed," she whispered. "We've been okay, Toby and me, but he's always wanted to know his dad. I just never had an answer." The Colonel stepped closer, hesitant. "And now that answer is me," he said bitterly, as though reeling from the irony. "I'll do right by him, Nancy, I swear, whatever it takes." She nodded, forcing composure. "I believe you want to, but this is all new for me, too. We'll just have to figure it out, step by step." A flicker of relief ghosted across his face. Yes, step by step. Silence pulled tight between them, the weight of unspoken questions looming. Nancy's mind brimmed with half-formed thoughts. The possibility of Toby's father living under the same roof, the uncertain future of the Colonel's engagement, the intrusion of media. But at least in that small moment, neither she nor the Colonel had the strength to voice them. He cleared his throat. "I'll leave you both to settle in. When Sylvia returns, I'll speak with her. Then come by so we can discuss how to handle the press. Meanwhile, make yourselves at home." Nancy nodded, stepping back to the living room as he exited the guest house. The front door clicked softly behind him, leaving Nancy and Toby in a hush that felt both lonely and oddly peaceful. Toby glanced up at her questioningly as if to ask, "What now?" She managed a fragile smile and lowered herself onto the couch. For the next hour, they tried to build a semblance of normalcy. Toby unpacked the small suitcase they'd hastily thrown together, placing his clothes in the guest room dresser. Nancy made sure he had a place for his school books, then peered into the fridge to find it empty. True to the Colonel's word, not much later, a polite staff member arrived with bags of groceries and a covered casserole dish. Nancy thanked them quietly, shutting the door behind them. She and Toby ate dinner at the small kitchen table, roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh rolls, remarkably delicious. Yet every bite felt tinged with the realization that their simple life had collided with unimaginable wealth. Toby poked at his vegetables, looking thoughtful. Nancy tried to lighten the mood by pointing out the bright flowers visible through the kitchen window, or suggesting they might stroll around the garden tomorrow. But they both knew the true conversation was lurking elsewhere, about how to adapt to a brand-new father in a brand-new world. When Toby's eyelids grew heavy, Nancy walked him to his new bedroom, tucking him in gently. The boy stared at the ceiling, which was a good foot higher than their old apartments. "Mommy, is it okay that I'm happy?" he asked in a small voice. "I know it's complicated, but I'm glad he's my dad." Tears pricked Nancy's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing hair back from his forehead. "It's okay to be happy. You deserve to be." She kissed his temple. "Rest now. Tomorrow, we'll figure out more. But tonight, just dream good things." Toby nodded, hugging his teddy tight. Nancy flicked off the light, leaving the door ajar, then padded back to the living room. She sank onto the couch, the hush of the guest house enfolding her. The day's events weighed on her, the confirmation of Toby's paternity, the swirl of changing dynamics. Somewhere across the manicured lawn, Colonel Hudson was in the main house, perhaps calling his fiancée, maybe grappling with how to reconcile the sudden existence of a son. Nancy felt a pang of empathy for him. She'd had 8 years to adapt to motherhood, even if she'd done it alone. He was only just beginning to discover fatherhood's responsibilities and complications. Wrapping her arms around herself, Nancy wondered if she'd done the right thing by accepting the Colonel's offer. Yet Toby's content expression, the relief in his face, told her that maybe, for now, this was the best place to be. Her biggest fear was that once the press realized Toby was indeed Colonel Hudson's child, the illusions of safety would vanish. Perhaps their life would never be simple again, but she resolved, for Toby's sake, she'd navigate whatever storm approached. The evening wore on. Nancy eventually curled up on the couch, willing herself to sleep. But rest eluded her, replaced by 1,000 questions about tomorrow, the wedding, and the new father who'd just entered their lives. Still, as exhaustion finally overtook her, one thought brought a fragile sense of comfort. Toby had found his dad, and for all its complications, that had to count for something. Sunlight filtered through the guest house windows the next morning, gently nudging Nancy awake. For a few blissful seconds, she forgot where she was, until her eyes landed on the unfamiliar ceiling and the memories of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up, brushing away stray strands of hair, and found herself on the couch where she'd fallen asleep. A soft hum of activity drifted in from outside, probably groundskeepers tending the garden or staff moving about the estate. Already this world felt so far removed from the cramped apartment she and Toby had called home. Yet the realization brought more unease than relief. She worried about the judgments of strangers and the possible resentment of Sylvia, not to mention how the press would react once the truth was officially made public. She stood and tiptoed down the short hallway to check on Toby. He was still asleep, his small frame curled around his teddy bear. A shaft of morning light illuminated his peaceful face. Nancy couldn't help smiling, despite the knot of apprehension in her stomach. At least Toby rested. That alone was worth the upheaval. Slipping back to the living area, Nancy flicked on the small TV that sat on a decorative table, an attempt to gauge whether the rumor mill had churned overnight. Sure enough, local news anchors were discussing the sudden swirl of speculation surrounding Colonel Robert Hudson's unexpected paternal revelation. With a grimace, Nancy muted the volume, unwilling to hear the scandalous commentary just yet. She knew it was only a matter of time before reporters connected every dot. A gentle knock on the guest house door made her jump. She quickly shut off the TV and padded over, heart thumping. Opening it, she found a house staffer holding a tray of breakfast pastries, fresh fruit, and juice. "Good morning, Ms. Rowe," the staffer said politely, offering a subdued smile. "The Colonel asked that I bring you something to start your day." Nancy mustered gratitude, taking the tray. "That's very kind, thank you." She hesitated, then asked, Has he mentioned anything about talking with the press yet?" The staffer shook his head. "I'm afraid I'm not privy to those details, ma'am, but I believe he's meeting with someone regarding arrangements." He dipped his head respectfully and left. Nancy closed the door with a heavy sigh. Arrangements. She carried the tray to the small kitchen table and arranged the food. Fresh croissants, a bowl of strawberries, and 2 glasses of orange juice, much nicer than she was used to. Toby would be thrilled. The thought warmed her heart. Before she could call Toby, her phone buzzed on the side table. Recognizing Carla's number, Nancy answered with hushed relief. "Carla?" Her friend's energetic voice filled the line. "Nancy, are you all right? I saw a million articles popping up." Even the local radio was talking about Colonel Hudson's secret son. They're all but confirming the paternity test was positive. Are you— Nancy sank into a chair, pressing her hand over her eyes. Yes, Toby is his son, she said softly. We're at his estate, just for safety from the press. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Wow, I don't even know what to say. How's Toby taking it? He's okay, Nancy replied, glancing toward his room. He's happy in a way. Everything else is just, chaos. I don't even know how we'll handle it. Carla's voice brimmed with empathy. I'm here for you, girl. Anything you need, someone to vent to, grocery runs, you name it. Thank you, Nancy breathed. I might call you again soon. This place is nice, but it doesn't feel like home. She forced a small laugh. Well, keep me posted and be careful, Carla urged. A lot of folks will want a piece of this story now. Nancy thanked her again and hung up. Releasing a shaky sigh, she turned her phone to silent. The last thing she wanted was an avalanche of unwanted calls or, worse, persistent tabloid requests. A moment later, Toby emerged from his bedroom, yawning and rubbing his eyes. Morning, Mommy, he mumbled. His features brightened upon seeing the breakfast spread. Wow, that looks good. Nancy ushered him to the table, pouring them both juice. She forced a cheerful tone, pointing out the sweet pastries. Eat up, sweetheart. Colonel Hudson had these sent over. Toby nodded thoughtfully, biting into a croissant. Do you think I'll see him today? He asked between small bites. I'm sure he'll stop by, Nancy said, trying to sound certain. She didn't want to mention the colonel might be meeting Sylvia or dealing with crisis management behind the scenes. But you and I might also take a walk outside, check out the garden. Sound good? Toby's smile stretched wider. Yes, I saw a fountain from my window last night. Nancy felt a bit lighter. Perfect. We'll do that after breakfast. And maybe, she hoped, it would give her a chance to gather herself in a peaceful corner of the estate. They finished their meal, then changed into day clothes. Nancy found simple jeans and a comfortable top, while Toby wore a t-shirt with a cartoon logo. She let him slip into his slightly worn sneakers. Together, they stepped into the bright morning sun, the estate grounds unfolding like a secret garden around them. A cobblestone path wound through rows of rose bushes, their petals glistening with dew. Trimmed hedges and bursts of wildflowers framed the walkway. Toby's eyes sparkled, and he dashed to a nearby pond, exclaiming at the sight of koi fish drifting beneath the water's surface. Nancy ambled after him, drinking in the serenity of the place. It was hard to reconcile such tranquility with the storm she knew was brewing in the media. They hadn't gone far when footsteps crunched on the path behind them. Nancy turned and saw Colonel Hudson approaching, dressed casually in a light jacket and slacks. His stride was brisk, but tension bracketed his eyes. Toby waved shyly. The colonel gave a tentative half-smile. "Morning," he greeted, stopping a few feet away. His gaze flicked from Nancy to Toby, who stood near the pond's edge. "May I walk with you?" "Of course," Nancy replied, measuring his expression. Something about his demeanor hinted he'd already confronted a stressful situation this morning. The colonel joined them at a slow pace, glancing at Toby with clear warmth. "Did you sleep well?" he asked gently. Toby nodded, stepping closer, almost testing whether he could stand beside his father. "Yeah, it's quiet here. I like it," he said. Then more timidly, "Are you busy today?" The colonel let out a soft breath. "Busy, yes, but I'd rather spend time with you." He ruffled Toby's hair, still an awkward motion, but Toby beamed at the touch. Nancy felt her throat tighten. She cleared it delicately. "How are things on your end?" she asked. "We saw the news mentions." He sighed, glancing away. "The press is already swirling with rumors. They're speculating that the paternity test came back positive. My PR team wants a formal announcement by tomorrow. If we wait longer, tabloids will fill the gap with anything they can invent." Nancy swallowed. I understand. And Sylvia? His face tightened, jaw clenching. We spoke briefly last night. She was upset, confused. She said she needs time to figure out if she can continue our engagement under these circumstances. As of this morning, she left for her parents' house. I expect to see her again soon, but I can't predict what she'll decide. He paused, then added in a quieter tone, I told her Toby's welfare is my top priority. Nancy's heart twisted. Despite everything, she felt a measure of sympathy for the fiancé's predicament. The Colonel's life had abruptly gained a child, and that revelation could upend even the strongest relationship. I'm sorry, she murmured. Colonel Hudson lifted a hand as though brushing off her sympathy. I appreciate it, but this is on me. I can't blame anyone for how they react. I only wish I'd known sooner. He looked at Toby, who stared at the fish shimmering in the pond. After a moment, the Colonel lowered his voice. Would you mind if I spend some time with Toby alone today? Maybe we could visit the stables or the greenhouse? I'd like to learn more about him. Let him get to know me better. Nancy hesitated, though her instincts told her Toby wanted precisely that. Sure, she said softly. I can stay at the guest house or walk the grounds, whatever makes you both comfortable. Toby's face lit up at the suggestion, and he clutched the Colonel's hand without hesitation. The Colonel's guarded stance softened, relief flooding his features. Toby, how about we go see the horses? He asked. Toby's nod was emphatic. Yes, please. Nancy watched them begin to walk away, father and son side by side. A strange mix of pride and fear seized her heart. She forced a wave. Have fun, she called, then settled on a nearby bench, letting them go on ahead. For several minutes, she sat quietly, scanning the manicured gardens and reflecting on how drastically life had shifted. Toby had a father now, an actual father who seemed willing to break down his own barriers to be part of Toby's life. Gratitude mingled with the dread of how swiftly everything else might unravel, especially with Sylvia's uncertain stance and the imminent media storm. She decided to meander further along the path, hoping to find a secluded spot to clear her mind. The estate grounds were extensive, dotted with small sculptures and stone benches. While exploring, she found herself passing a hedge-lined corridor that opened into a secluded rose garden. The fragrance was almost intoxicating, roses in pink, red, and white blooming in careful rows. But as she rounded a corner, she spotted a figure, Sylvia. The fiancé stood alone near a wrought-iron bench, arms folded as she stared at the vibrant blooms. Nancy's breath caught. She considered backing away before being noticed, but her footsteps on the gravel must have given her away. Sylvia turned, pinning Nancy with a tense gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. The fiancé's elegant outfit was subdued, simple slacks and a fitted blazer, but her face was drawn, betraying the emotional turmoil beneath. Nancy opened her mouth, words tangled. Before she could speak, Sylvia huffed a wry laugh. Fancy seeing you here, she said, voice tight. You enjoy the Colonel's gardens? Nancy's cheeks flushed. Sylvia, I'm sorry for intruding, she began softly. I didn't know you'd be... Sylvia's expression flickered with impatience, then a kind of weary acceptance. No, it's me who came unannounced. I wanted to pick up a few things I'd left here. I saw you from across the lawn. Don't worry, I'm not here to fight. A heavy silence hung between them. Nancy noticed Sylvia's posture waver, her eyes damp as though she'd shed tears recently. I don't mean to complicate your wedding, Nancy ventured, voice almost trembling. Toby and I never intended to... Sylvia exhaled sharply, cutting her off. I know, she said, her voice less brittle than before. This is nobody's fault. It's just 8 years of secrets dropped in our laps. I feel like I'm living someone else's life. She glanced aside, blinking hard. Robert told me the test was positive, that Toby is without doubt his son. Nancy nodded, heart heavy. Yes. Sylvia looked at her with a strange mixture of pity and anger. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "Move in permanently? Raise Toby here and become part of the Colonel's perfect philanthropic world? Do you expect Robert to marry you?" Nancy recoiled as though stung. "No," she answered firmly. "I have no such expectations. I'm only here because reporters swarmed us. I had to keep Toby safe, and the Colonel offered us a place to stay, that's all." Sylvia's stare lingered, scanning Nancy's every twitch. Then she folded her arms, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I don't hate your son, Nancy. He's just a child. But can you imagine how this feels for me?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. Robert's entire life is going to revolve around Toby now, and maybe it should. He is his father. But where does that leave me? Nancy's throat tightened. She'd never truly considered the fiancé's perspective so personally. She tried to speak gently. "I'm sorry. Truly. But Toby deserves a father. If you love the Colonel, you might find a way to share him with Toby, unless that's too much." Sylvia's expression flickered with pain. She looked down at the roses swaying in the breeze, tears threatening to spill. "I can't decide in a day. My parents want me to call off the wedding entirely. They say this scandal will ruin our image." She gave a hollow laugh. "Our image? As if my marriage should be a PR move." Nancy winced, unsure how to respond. "I'm so sorry," she murmured again, at a loss for words. For several heartbeats they just stood there, two women trapped in a situation neither had asked for. Finally, Sylvia squared her shoulders. "If Robert chooses Toby over me, I won't fight it," she said quietly. "But if there's room for me, maybe I can learn to accept that child. I just don't know." Nancy released a trembling sigh, unsure whether to hug Sylvia or retreat. She settled on compassion. "Give yourself time. This is huge. Nobody's forcing any outcome." Sylvia nodded, eyes glimmering. "Thank you for saying that." She swallowed, turning away slightly. "Well, I have to pack some things from the main house. Good luck, living here." Her tone was tinted with resignation. Without further words, Sylvia brushed past Nancy and followed the path back toward the mansion. Nancy watched her go, feeling equal parts relief and sympathy. For all Sylvia's earlier hostility, the woman was clearly wrestling with heartbreak and confusion. Slowly, Nancy found her way to a different bench, sitting down to catch her breath. The rose garden's fragrant air surrounded her, a bittersweet reminder of how nature's beauty often contrasted life's tangled messes. She closed her eyes, recalling Sylvia's raw words. Where does that leave me? Nancy realized, with a twist of guilt, that she might ask the same question for herself. She had Toby, which was her main focus. But how did she fit into the Colonel's new reality? Especially if Sylvia decided to remain in the picture and marry him? Her thoughts ricocheted, each possibility more fraught than the last. One thing was certain. Toby's place in the Colonel's life was non-negotiable now. Nancy just wished she knew where she stood, whether Colonel Hudson genuinely wanted to share more than just fatherhood, or if his support was purely driven by responsibility. In the quiet hush of the rose garden, Nancy bowed her head. If only there were a simple path forward. But in the swirl of emotions, media prying, and uncertain affections, she suspected this was only the beginning of a far more complicated journey. Nancy stayed in the rose garden for some time, letting the gentle rustle of leaves soothe her frazzled thoughts. Over the years, she'd grown accustomed to relying on her own judgment and working through struggles privately. Financial difficulties, raising Toby alone, the uncertainty of day-to-day living. Now she found herself navigating a situation far more complex than she'd ever imagined. Eventually, she stood and made her way back toward the guest house. Halfway there, she paused at the low fence separating the rose garden from a wide lawn. A pair of horses galloped across the field, their gleaming coats catching the sunlight. In the distance, she spotted Colonel Hudson and Toby near the stables, Toby's arms flailed in excited gestures, likely asking question after question about the horses. Nancy couldn't help smiling. Despite the emotional tangle with Sylvia, despite the storm brewing in the media, seeing Toby laugh with his father triggered a surge of relief. It had been an unspoken dream of hers, if she were honest, to watch Toby grow up with a real paternal figure, someone who would teach him, protect him. Now it was happening, even if the circumstances were messy. She walked a winding path that led to the stables. The smell of hay and the soft nickers of horses filled the air. Toby spotted her immediately, beaming. "Mommy, look! Dad, Colonel Hudson is showing me how to hold the reins." Nancy approached, her cheeks warming at Toby's spontaneous slip. Dad. She hadn't heard Toby call him that out loud, with such enthusiasm since the paternity test result. But from the look on Colonel Hudson's face, surprised, touched, maybe even proud, it seemed the word wasn't unwelcome. "Want to try?" the Colonel asked Toby, indicating a gentle mare with a smooth chocolate-brown coat. Toby's eyes widened. "Ride? I don't know if I can." Nancy tensed. Toby had never been on a horse before, but Colonel Hudson's voice was patient. "We won't go fast. I'll hold the lead." He glanced at Nancy for permission. She hesitated, but Toby's pleading gaze won her over. "Okay." Nancy relented softly. "But be careful." The Colonel guided Toby to a small mounting block. With surprisingly deft movements, perhaps old habits from a military upbringing, he helped Toby settle onto the saddle. Toby clutched the reins nervously, his small hands unsure, but the Colonel kept a steady grip near the mare's bridle. Nancy hovered close, pulse thrumming. Seeing them together, father and son, in this serene moment, brought a mix of hope and vulnerability. Colonel Hudson walked the horse in a slow circle, Toby's grin widening with each soft clop of hooves. A swirl of gratitude and longing washed over Nancy, reminded of how these father-son experiences might have been lost if fate hadn't intervened. When the Colonel stopped the horse, Toby nearly bounced off in excitement. "That was awesome," he said, eyes shining with new confidence. He turned to Nancy. "Mommy, did you see me?" "I did," she praised, chuckling in relief at how smoothly it had gone. "You looked like a natural." Toby glanced shyly at the Colonel, who gave him an approving nod. "Maybe next time, we'll go a bit farther," the Colonel said. "When you feel ready." He carefully lifted Toby down, patting the horse's flank affectionately. The mare bobbed her head as though sharing in the calm. Nancy was about to speak when she noticed a tall man striding across the lawn toward them, wearing a business-casual blazer and holding a tablet. She recognized him vaguely as one of the Colonel's staff, perhaps a legal or public relations associate. Colonel Hudson noticed him too, and tensed. "Sir," the staffer greeted, inclining his head politely. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've just received confirmation that a well-known tabloid is planning to run a front-page story tomorrow about your son. They're claiming an exclusive, though I'm not sure how they got the details." Nancy's stomach lurched. Toby frowned, perhaps sensing the abrupt shift in mood. The Colonel's jaw set. "I see," he replied curtly. "And they have specific information?" The staffer nodded. "Sources say they have photos from the engagement party plus anonymous quotes regarding the paternity test. It sounds like they intend to paint Ms. Rowe as someone who withheld the truth to force a scandal." Nancy felt her cheeks burn, a flare of indignation choking her. Toby turned to her, confusion and worry in his gaze. The Colonel placed a comforting hand on Toby's shoulder, then spoke with grim calm. "This means we need to issue our statement today. No more waiting." Nancy found her voice, though it trembled. "I can't believe they'd try to spin it that way. We did the test as soon as we discovered a possibility." "I know," the Colonel interrupted gently. "They're just speculating to sell papers." He turned to the staffer, voice firm. "Get the PR team on standby. We'll finalize the statement within the hour." The staffer nodded, tapped his tablet, and hurried off. Nancy stood there, pulse still throbbing, Toby gripping her hand for reassurance. "This is going to get ugly, isn't it?" she asked in a low voice, hating how helpless it made her feel. The colonel hesitated, glancing at Toby before answering. "We can't prevent the headlines, but we can put out the truth in our own words. Toby's legitimacy, the fact that this was a surprise for both of us, that we're working together to do what's best for him." Nancy gathered her resolve. "Okay," she murmured, exchanging a look with Toby. "As long as Toby doesn't get harassed." Colonel Hudson offered a small, protective smile. "I'll do everything I can to protect him. And you. But we might need photos, casual ones to show we're on good terms, that Toby is my son and you're not some opportunistic stranger, if you agree, that is." Nancy swallowed her initial resistance. She'd never wanted media attention. Yet, faced with the tabloids' onslaught, maybe giving the official story was the lesser evil. "All right," she whispered. "If it helps Toby, I'll do it." Toby blinked, looking from Nancy to his father. "Pictures?" he echoed. She kneeled, smoothing his hair. "It's part of telling the public that you have a dad now," she explained softly. "They want proof we're not lying." The boy's brow furrowed, but he nodded bravely. "Okay, if it keeps them from saying mean things about you, Mommy, I'll do it." Nancy's heart swelled. She tugged him into a hug, grateful for how protective Toby could be, even at his age. Meanwhile, Colonel Hudson's voice remained gentle. "I'll arrange for a discreet photographer, someone on my staff, so we don't get ambushed by random cameras. We can do a short photo session today, then release the images with a statement." Nancy rose, meeting his gaze. "Where?" He eyed the stables, the nearby fields, and the estate grounds. "Somewhere casual, maybe just outside the guest house or in a garden. Something that shows we're comfortable as a family." At that last word, family, his tone wavered. Nancy wondered if he was still grappling with what that meant for him, for Sylvia, for everyone. "Let's do it," she said softly. Toby squeezed her hand again, and Colonel Hudson inclined his head, already pulling out his phone to contact his PR team. An hour later, they found themselves back near the Rose Garden, accompanied by a single staff photographer and a quiet woman from the Colonel's media department. Toby wore a clean t-shirt and jeans, while Nancy had changed into a simple blouse. Colonel Hudson kept his outfit much the same as earlier, casual, yet neat. The media specialist, a petite woman with a polite smile, directed them gently. "Stand together near those hedges, please. We just want a few relaxed shots. Colonel, maybe rest a hand on Toby's shoulder." "Yes, Ms. Rowe. You can stand on the other side." Nancy's pulse thrummed. She tried to appear natural, but the situation felt surreal, posing as a newly discovered family, as though it were some benign photo shoot, rather than a lifesaver thrown against an oncoming wave of scandal. Toby gave a small, bright grin when the camera clicked. Colonel Hudson maintained a composed expression, though lines of tension bracketed his mouth. After a handful of shots, the media specialist nodded, satisfied. "That should be plenty. We'll choose the best ones and attach them to the official statement. Something like, Colonel Robert Hudson joyously welcomes his newly discovered son Toby and vows to provide a stable environment. I'll show you a draft before anything's released." Nancy felt a strange twinge at the word joyously. The Colonel was doing his best to embrace fatherhood, but joy was complicated here, overshadowed by regrets, responsibilities, and disruptions to his upcoming wedding. Still, she understood the optics. They needed a hopeful spin to counter the tabloid's nasty narrative. "Thank you," Colonel Hudson replied quietly. "We appreciate the help." The media specialist left with the photographer, promising to send a draft of the statement soon. Toby watched them go, eyes flicking to Nancy. "Are we done?" he asked, tone uncertain. Nancy bent down. "Yes, sweetheart." "You did great," she praised, though part of her felt uneasy at involving her child in a PR campaign. Toby nodded but didn't look fully convinced. Colonel Hudson placed a reassuring hand on Toby's shoulder. "Why don't we head to the guest house for a while?" he suggested. "Grab lunch, try to relax." He looked at Nancy, his gaze clouded. "Then, I'll have to deal with more phone calls." Nancy nodded, swallowing a pang of empathy. "Sure, lunch." They made their way along the path, Toby bouncing a little as if tension and excitement were battling inside him. When they reached the guest house, the colonel lingered in the doorway, hesitating. "May I stay?" he asked, voice subdued. "Just for a bit. To eat together? I need to talk with you about some arrangements for Toby's schooling, now that reporters will be on high alert." Nancy sensed how difficult it must be for him to ask permission in his own estate. "Of course," she answered. "We can figure this out together." Inside, the colonel removed his jacket and draped it over a chair, glancing around. "I hope this place has been comfortable for you," he said, studying Nancy's face. "I realize it's a big change." She offered a faint, sincere smile. "It's nicer than where we were. But yes, it's a change." She didn't mention the pang of missing her cramped apartment's familiarity or the sense of losing her autonomy. Toby hurried to the small kitchen, opening the fridge to see if the staff had restocked it. A moment later, Toby poked his head out. "Sandwich stuff. I'll help make them." His eyes gleamed with eagerness, perhaps relishing a slice of normalcy. Nancy and the colonel exchanged surprised smiles. "Go for it, champ," Colonel Hudson said, voice brightening. In the kitchen, Toby pulled out bread, deli meat, cheese, and condiments, while Nancy helped with slicing tomatoes. She felt the colonel's presence behind her, an odd sense of domestic comfort mingling with awkwardness. "You're good at that," he observed as she arranged slices neatly. "I guess you've had a lot of experience cooking." Nancy nodded, carefully layering ingredients. "Yes, cooking's how I make a living. I've done catering, worked in various kitchens, some stable, some not. Even the Veterans Club job was a big chance for me until Toby's sudden proclamation changed everything." She stifled a rueful laugh. "I doubt they'll hire me again now, given the publicity. People might assume all kinds of things." The colonel's brow furrowed. "They won't dismiss you for that. If they do, they'll answer to me." His protective tone caught her off guard, stirring conflicting emotions. Gratitude, but also a lingering desire to stand on her own feet. "I'm fine," she said softly. "I appreciate your concern, but I've always managed, and I'll keep doing so." He studied her a moment, then gave a respectful nod. "I understand," he murmured, stepping aside so Toby could present the assembled sandwiches proudly. "Look at that." The colonel grinned, impressed by Toby's careful stacking of turkey and cheese. They carried plates to the small living room, seating themselves around the coffee table. Toby chattered about riding the horse earlier, describing each detail. The colonel listened intently, nodding and offering the occasional comment about his own experiences with animals while stationed abroad. Nancy observed them, her heart full of cautious hope. This was what Toby had longed for, a dad's attentive ear, a sense of belonging. Yet beneath the warmth, tension lurked like a dormant fault line. Questions about Sylvia, the wedding, and their future arrangement loomed in the background. Nancy decided not to broach them over lunch, reluctant to sour Toby's rare moment of genuine happiness. Afterward, Colonel Hudson helped clear the dishes, then checked his phone. "They've sent the draft statement," he told Nancy, meeting her gaze across the kitchen counter. "Would you like to read it?" Nancy's stomach fluttered. "Yes, please." She dried her hands and moved beside him. Together they scrolled through the PR team's careful wording. "Colonel Robert Hudson is pleased to confirm recent developments regarding his paternity of a young boy, Toby Rowe. This discovery has been as surprising as it is meaningful. While the details of Toby's conception were unknown to the colonel until recently, he welcomes Toby and his mother, Nancy Rowe, with open arms, committed to supporting them fully. Colonel Hudson requests privacy as they adjust to this new family dynamic." Nancy read it twice, noting how neatly it smoothed over the messy reality of the situation. No mention of Sylvia, no mention of the engagement, just a call for privacy. "It's okay," she said, aware that was the best she could muster. "It's not false, at least." Colonel Hudson's jaw clenched briefly. "It'll have to do. I'll approve it, and they'll likely release it tonight." He sighed. "Prepare for more attention once it's public. Every network might run it." Toby wandered in, hugging his teddy bear. "Is everything okay?" Nancy bent down, putting on a reassuring expression. "Yes, sweetie. The world's about to learn you're officially Colonel Hudson's son. But don't worry, we'll keep you safe." The colonel placed a hand gently on Toby's shoulder. "We'll handle this together," he promised. Toby nodded solemnly, leaning slightly into his father's touch. Something in that small gesture tugged fiercely at Nancy's heart, a reminder that no matter how chaotic everything else was, the connection between father and son was worth protecting. As the afternoon advanced, Colonel Hudson left to make calls and finalize the PR statement. Nancy and Toby settled into the guest house, playing a board game and reading some of the children's books on the shelf. She tried to fend off the creeping dread that accompanied each passing hour, bracing for the media firestorm. It was only a matter of time before the phones would ring endlessly, the tabloids would spin stories, and curious onlookers might even gather at the estate gates, eager for a glimpse. Late in the day, a staff member delivered dinner. Another reminder that they weren't truly independent here. Nancy thanked them quietly, forcing herself to remain calm for Toby's sake. As she set plates on the table, Toby asked, "Do you think he'll come by again tonight?" She pursed her lips. "Maybe," she answered gently. "He's probably busy." Toby's expression wavered, disappointment lurking in his eyes. But he nodded. "Yeah, I guess so." They ate in companionable quiet, though Nancy's mind teemed with questions. Where was Sylvia now? Had she seen the statement? Did the colonel want Toby to remain permanently on the estate, or would they return to their apartment after the media frenzy? And how would Nancy support Toby financially if her old job fell through? By the time they finished cleaning up, the sun had set. No word from Colonel Hudson. Toby refused to show it openly, but Nancy sensed his worry. She set up a small movie on the guest house TV, letting him watch while curled in blankets. Eventually, he dozed off, the flickering screen illuminating his peaceful face. Nancy turned it off and checked her phone. Several missed calls from Carla, texts from acquaintances, and a flurry of news updates about the colonel's statement. She tapped one link, reading the published version online. Cole Hudson confirmed paternity, welcomes son, requests privacy. She scrolled down to see hundreds of comments, some supportive, some vile, many speculating about Nancy's intentions or Sylvia's reaction. A wave of nausea hit her, and she locked her phone. Breathing unsteadily, she reminded herself that this was exactly why they'd come here, to shield Toby from that ugliness. Somewhere beyond the manicured lawns of this estate, the world was devouring the story. Journalists and onlookers would concoct countless narratives about Nancy, the secret mother, the cunning mistress, or the unassuming cook. She dreaded what Toby might read someday, no matter how she tried to shield him. Slipping into her bedroom, she switched off the lamp. Tomorrow, another new day would dawn in this unfamiliar life. With the press statement out, everything would escalate. Yet amid the swirling anxiety, Nancy clung to one truth. Toby finally had his father, and the colonel seemed determined not to abandon him. Whatever came next, they'd face it step by step, one uncertain sunrise at a time. Night passed slowly in the quiet guest house. Nancy awoke before dawn, a sense of anticipation thrumming in her veins. She wasn't sure if it was dread, hope, or some mix of both. Her phone's home screen confirmed that the colonel's official statement had circulated widely. News outlets, gossip sites, social media. Already there were headlines speculating about Sylvia's next moves, about Nancy's background, about Toby's future. She could barely stomach the idea of reading further. Tiptoeing through the hallway, she peeked into Toby's room. He still slept soundly, clutching his teddy bear. The sight of his peaceful form steadied her. No matter what anyone said or wrote, Toby was just a child trying to understand his new reality. She closed the door gently, deciding to let him rest as long as possible. Making her way to the small living area, she turned on a lamp and curled up on the couch, phone in hand. A series of texts from Carla lit up the screen. Carla: "Girl, the statement is everywhere. Are you okay? Please call me when you can. People at the store keep asking me about you. Some neighbors said reporters have shown up near your old apartment. Don't come back here yet, it's chaos." Nancy closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. She typed a quick reply, assuring Carla they were safe on the estate and would stay put for now. She added a heartfelt thank you for the warning. Then, setting the phone aside, she braced herself for the day's challenges. Time slipped by in tense quiet until, around 7 in the morning, a gentle knock sounded on the door. Nancy's stomach flipped. She rose to answer, half expecting Colonel Hudson with more updates or possibly Sylvia wanting another tense confrontation. Instead, a uniformed estate staff member greeted her with a sympathetic nod. "Good morning, Miss Rowe. We have visitors at the gate, reporters unfortunately. The Colonel has instructed us to ensure your privacy, but we wanted to inform you. The press likely wants a direct comment or photo." Nancy's hands tightened on the doorknob. She forced a steady breath. "Thank you for letting me know," she managed. "Please keep them away from Toby." The staff member nodded. "Absolutely. We're also expecting some individuals from the Colonel's legal team to finalize custody and support arrangements. They'll likely arrive soon, but no one else will be admitted without permission." Her throat went dry at the mention of custody and support arrangements. Of course, that had to be sorted out. Still, it felt too soon, as though her and Toby's entire lives were being reorganized overnight. "Thanks," she repeated, stepping back to close the door. By the time she turned around, Toby stood in the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mommy?" he asked, voice groggy. "What was that about?" Nancy reached for him, guiding him to the couch. "Reporters. They're outside the estate gates. The Colonel's staff says they won't let them in." She tried to make it sound reassuring. Toby nodded slowly. "So they can't take my picture unless we go out?" he clarified. She saw a flash of relief in his eyes. He was still just a child, frightened of strangers with cameras. She smoothed his hair, mustering a soft smile. "That's right. We'll be careful, okay? No one is coming in unless we say so." He leaned into her side and she wrapped an arm around him. The warmth of his small body was a reminder of how high the stakes had become, protecting Toby from invasive questions, from the world's prying eyes. She knew she couldn't shield him forever, but she'd try to do so for as long as possible. About an hour later, another knock sounded. This time, Nancy braced herself for the Colonel's legal counsel. Opening the door, she found not lawyers but Colonel Hudson himself, flanked by a gray-haired man in a professional suit. Toby sprang to his feet at the sight of his father. "Good morning," Colonel Hudson said, voice subdued as usual, though a smile ghosted across his lips upon seeing Toby. "I hope we're not intruding too early. This is Mr. Barton, my personal attorney." He gestured to the older man, who inclined his head politely. "I asked him here so we can discuss, well, formal arrangements for Toby's future." Nancy inhaled, stepping back so they could enter. Toby hovered near the sofa, curiosity dancing in his eyes. "It's okay, Toby," Nancy assured him. "We're just going to talk grown-up stuff." Mr. Barton set down a slim briefcase on the coffee table, adjusting his glasses as he took a seat. Colonel Hudson looked at Nancy apologetically. "We can do this another time if you're not ready." "No," she interrupted gently. "I know it has to be done." Despite her apprehension, she wanted clarity too. Toby deserved stability. She sat beside him, resting a hand on his back. "Go ahead." With a brisk nod, Mr. Barton opened the case, pulling out documents. Ms. Rowe, Colonel Hudson and I have prepared a draft agreement outlining child support, medical coverage, and potential living arrangements for Toby. We'd also like to ensure Toby's schooling is handled discreetly so he's protected from media intrusion. Nancy stiffened, overwhelmed by the formality. Schooling? Colonel Hudson exhaled. I thought we might enroll Toby in a private academy. The tuition would be covered, of course. They're used to high-profile students with security needs, but that's only if you agree, he added hastily. I just worry about paparazzi outside your old apartment and Toby's current school. Toby sat up straighter, eyes flicking between the adults. He didn't speak, but Nancy could sense his unease. I need to think about that, she murmured, voice tight. He likes his current classmates, though it might not be safe with reporters around. Mr. Barton nodded sympathetically. That's understandable. Everything here is flexible, a starting point for negotiations. But Toby's well-being is paramount. Nancy offered a faint nod, heart pounding. She reached for the papers but hesitated. So, what exactly is Colonel Hudson proposing? She asked, gaze shifting to the man who had fathered her child without either of them realizing it. Colonel Hudson lowered himself into an armchair, leaning forward. I'm proposing shared custody. Toby can remain with you as primary caretaker, of course, but I want legal rights as his father so I can make decisions for him if needed, and I'd like him to spend some time here on the estate, regular visits, possibly weekends. We can work out a schedule. Nancy's mind spun. She pictured Toby shuttling between two worlds, the modest life she'd built on her own and the Colonel's palatial existence. Yet she couldn't deny Toby deserved those experiences, deserved a real father's involvement. Okay, she whispered, scanning his face. We can try that. As for financial support, Mr. Barton chimed in, tapping the papers. The Colonel wishes to provide monthly child support and set up a trust fund for Toby's future education and well-being. This is separate from any immediate schooling costs. A trust fund. Nancy had never dreamed of Toby having such security. Her instincts warred between gratitude and pride. She'd always fended for themselves, but Toby's needs were changing in ways she couldn't manage alone. She traced her fingers over the edges of the documents. And me? She asked softly. I don't need charity, but I do worry about job security now with all this publicity. Colonel Hudson's expression grew sober. I won't let you suffer due to our new circumstances. If the Veterans Club job is lost or if you face harassment, I'll help you find something else, discreetly. Or if you'd rather not work right now until the media cools, that's your decision. The trust is for Toby, but I can assist with your living expenses too, if needed. A flicker of stubborn independence flared within Nancy, yet she recognized this was about Toby's stability. I'll think about it, she said at last. I don't want to rely on you for everything, but thank you. She felt Toby's eyes on her, and she gently touched his hand. What do you think, baby? She asked. About maybe going to a private school and visiting your dad here sometimes. Is that okay with you? Toby shrugged, voice quiet. It sounds okay. I'll miss my old friends, but I'm kind of scared of the cameras. He wrinkled his nose, glancing anxiously at Colonel Hudson. Will I see you often if I do that? The Colonel's face softened. Absolutely. I'll see you regularly, Toby. Maybe we can ride horses, practice sports, read books, you name it. Toby relaxed, a small smile tugging at his lips. Nancy, though, still felt the weight of these abrupt changes. She cleared her throat, turning to Mr. Barton. What about the possibility that Sylvia remains in the picture? I don't want Toby to feel unwelcome if she and the Colonel still marry, or if they decide not to. How does that affect Toby? It felt surreal to be referencing the Colonel's fiancée in this context, as though Toby's life needed her blessing too. But that was the reality. Mr. Barton gave a measured response. From a legal standpoint, her decisions do not affect Toby's paternal rights or Colonel Hudson's obligations. If she remains, that's a personal arrangement for the Colonel. Toby's status as his son is secure. Colonel Hudson nodded. Sylvia and I are discussing our future, but either way, Toby is my son. My commitment to him won't change. Nancy read the sincerity in his eyes. She believed him. Even if the Colonel's engagement fell apart, Toby's place was indisputable now. That knowledge both relieved and worried her. Toby would be part of a high society world Nancy had never aspired to, with all the scrutiny that came with it. For the next half hour, they reviewed lines in the draft agreement. Custody terms, financial provisions, a clause about Toby's privacy and media contact. Toby fidgeted, occasionally asking questions when he heard a word like court or visitation, but Nancy did her best to explain in simple terms. Colonel Hudson showed unexpected patience, pausing whenever Toby seemed confused, offering calm reassurances. At last, Mr. Barton prepared to leave, promising to send a revised final version soon. Nancy walked him to the door, gratitude and anxiety battling in her chest. Colonel Hudson stayed inside with Toby, likely answering the boy's endless queries about the formal adult talk. Outside on the guest house porch, Mr. Barton shook Nancy's hand gently. "Ms. Rowe, I know this is overwhelming, but you have my number. Call if you have any concerns. Colonel Hudson wants to do right by his son. I believe he means that sincerely." "I do too," Nancy admitted. "Thank you, Mr. Barton. Good day." He departed, leaving Nancy standing on the porch. Nearby, a tall hedge concealed a portion of the estate, and beyond that, the gates where reporters likely still lingered. She inhaled the fresh air, letting the fragrance of the manicured gardens fill her senses. So much had changed in just a few days. Toby had a father willing to fight for him. And in one sense, Nancy's old life had crumbled, replaced by something entirely new. Stepping back inside, she found Toby chatting animatedly with Colonel Hudson. "We can get you set up with a tutoring option if you don't want to jump schools mid-semester," the Colonel was saying. "Then in the fall, if you like, you can start fresh." "That'd be cool," Toby replied, glancing up as Nancy entered. "Mommy, did you hear? A tutor." She forced a warm smile. "That sounds like a plan," she said, moving to settle on the arm of the couch. "We'll see what works best." Colonel Hudson rose, exuding his usual quiet composure. "I should get back to the main house," he said. "There's a call with my PR team. They want to set up a short press conference tomorrow to address any lingering questions. I won't mention you or Toby directly if you'd prefer, just keep it vague. But some accountability is expected." Nancy bit her lip. It was all happening so fast. But she nodded. "I trust your judgment," she said, voice quivering slightly. "Just protect Toby." "I will." He reached out, ruffling Toby's hair. Toby grinned. "I'll stop by again this evening," the Colonel added. "We'll have dinner together if you're comfortable with that." Toby nodded and Nancy offered a faint, "Yes, thank you." Then, almost hesitantly, the Colonel placed a hand briefly on Nancy's shoulder, a gesture of both apology and reassurance. She found herself covering his hand with hers for a second, offering a small nod. Words felt inadequate, but the mutual understanding remained. They were in this together now. He left, shutting the door quietly behind him. Nancy drew Toby into a hug and they lingered like that for a moment, mother and son on a journey they hadn't chosen, but couldn't avoid. One thing was certain, the child who'd once pointed to a stranger across a grand hall exclaiming, "Dad," had been right, and that single word had changed their lives irrevocably. "Mommy," Toby murmured into her shoulder, "everything is so different now." Nancy's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered, eyes falling shut, "but we'll face it one day at a time, together." Beyond the guest house walls, reporters waited at the gates, cameras poised. In the mansion, Colonel Robert Hudson wrestled with media briefings and perhaps a fraying engagement. And in this small refuge, Nancy and Toby held onto each other, bracing for a future that was no longer solely theirs to decide. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen